Welcome, everybody, to the April 24th, 2025 meeting of the Concord Planning Board. We are starting, I guess, in person unless our hybrid member joins, and then we will figure out what we need to do from there. But right now we don't need a roll call vote to get started, so I'm just going to start us. And the first item on the agenda is the definitive subdivision public hearing. So in accordance with the provisions of MGL Chapter 41, Section 81T in the Town of Concord Subdivision Rules and Regulations to review the definitive subdivision plan application of Deborah and Paul Okanoff for the improvement of a roadway and the creation of two new building lots at 61B Walden Street, parcel 0274-2.
Okay. So I think it was April 10th, the applicant did submit revised plans and information that was reviewed by town staff and specifically mostly by the Concord Public Works Engineering Division, and all outstanding issues and concerns were either addressed or addressed through recommended conditions. The board received the draft decision. Sue did provide comments that I did not see until I was out this morning, so I didn't see until just recently. So
I provided them just recently.
I was trying to be nice. So if the board would like, I can run through, put up Sue's version and run through the different edits and comments. And then there were also some outstanding questions for the board to discuss. There's two additional waivers. And then I believe Christine highlighted in the report additional conversation about the restricted envelope that was proposed. So Robert, unless you have anything else, Robert Melvin, who's with Stamsky McNary, is here for the applicant. Unless you have something else to add, I'll go through and then the board can take public comment and questions.
Sure. Yeah, just wanted to say a couple things here. Thank you, Elizabeth. We have satisfied the engineering division's concerns with the drainage. We're now proposing a porous pavement design at the beginning of the roadway. And that would include also a backup system which would include a trench drain leading to a leaching catch basin. And this is meant for icy conditions in the winter months. If the porous pavement were to get clogged up from ice, there is a backup system in place. The road was also raised at the beginning to further separate the distance to high groundwater, and that is the reason for an additional waiver request. It is to section 6.8.9, which states that the grade of the roadway should be 2%, no more than 2% within the first 60 feet of the intersection. We have increased that to about 5% here, which was a recommendation from the engineering division in order to get around those drainage issues. I also wanted to point out that we have revised earth removal calculations. The roadway, as well as each of the individual lots, are now all under 1,000 cubic yards of cut material. We also provided a cut fill analysis for the proof road, which did show that the amount of earthwork is significantly higher. It does, although, balance out to a nice 257 cubic yards compared to the 36 to construct the proposed roadway. But if you take a look at the individual cut and individual fill numbers, they are much higher by a factor of 10 there. And then I believe the last thing I wanted to point out, which I believe you mentioned, we are proposing some restricted building envelopes I can just quickly share my screen and show you that. Okay, so if we look at the site development sheet, we have now have a hatched area back here, which is restricting the building envelope to this area. If we follow the original building setback lines, they'd now be bound by this hatched area as well, which would also not require or it would prevent tree removal in this area as well. And this would be something that's written into the homeowners association agreements. And I believe that is all the major points I wanted to just bring up here. Throw it back to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question there? You said the hatched area, in the hatched area, tree removal would be prevented. Is that just tree regrading or also regrading?
It would be tree removal, but you know, you couldn't really, that prevent anyone from having to, you know, adjust the grade there. I mean, there's a lot of trees in the area. I mean, you'd really have to cut through to really do anything significant back there.
So the board's decision is actually that that is a full restricted area, so no tree removal, no grading, no structures.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that's what's in the draft decision.
Okay, and I did see that, but I wasn't sure from the draft decision what the area was. It's the same as the hatched
That-
area.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
That's the hatched area. So I'm gonna skip over punctuation and,
Hmm.
um, and would instead of will. And then I think the first, gotta reduce this, sorry. So the first substantive comment, the applicant is proposing a T turnaround in lieu of the required cul-de-sac, as the construction of the cul-de-sac would require extensive fill and additional pavement. So I think it's, if it's, Sue's comment is if it's required, then it is not absolutely required because the board can always grant waivers, but I understand it would be in
Standardly
lieu of
required?
well, it's the construction design standards.
Oh, so maybe we could
So-
say here, required cul-de-sac from. in the-
Design standards.
Design standards, perfect.
And Christine's first note was having the board have a conversation about the proposed building and tree removal restriction area. So the board is being asked for waivers to the construction design standards. And the proposed building and tree removal restriction area is, you know, I'm gonna say, in lieu of, you know, or to help support the board's granting of the waivers to the construction design standards. The first question, that was not on the previous plans, so the board's never had a conversation about it. So whether the board feels that that proposed area is adequate. As I mentioned, the decision is written that it is restricted to tree removal, grading, and structures.
Can we look at it now at the
Sure.
area again, and then maybe the applicant can identify why they've partitioned this restricted area from the non-restricted area?
You commented, I think at our previous meeting, that the reason for us granting the waiver from the cul-de-sac was to preserve the ravine. But even though it would be possible to preserve the ravine, there was nothing that required them to preserve the ravine in recompense for getting dispensation from the cul-de-sac, a waiver. And this would then absolutely preserve the ravine in order for them to get the waiver. And if they wanted to fill in the ravine and build the cul-de-sac, after all, they would have to come back to the board and ask all over again. That's my understanding at any rate.
But I guess my question was,
What,
So the question to you, Robert, is why was the line proposed in this location and I guess not further up the slope?
And in part, what my question related to that was, if we're proposing to have concessions on design based on concessions that the builder is doing, they drew a line at the bottom of the ravine. So basically, what we're looking at is the left half is unbuildable based on your plan anyway. So what does the town get out of those concessions?
and why not go further up the hill?
Yeah.
Forward, yeah.
Yeah, so we drew this line initially, it's based on the bottom of the ravine area. If you follow the contours, that's sort of where it flattens out down there. So we figured if we restrict it to there, no structures, a structure could potentially be built there. It is much less likely structures are going to be built along this slope as well. But we felt, we were, giving up this part of the land here. We didn't want to restrict the backyards of these lots too much. We want to allow somewhat of a developable backyard. And it's going to be difficult for them to get that as is, given the steep slopes here. It's not a very usable area anyway. So it'd be difficult to do that. So, we're just trying to leave any developer or potential buyer the opportunity to, have more of a backyard there, if that's their preference.
so could we have more of the area preserved in terms of the wooded? I mean, I would think if someone's going to buy the property, they're going to buy it with the knowledge that there's mostly woods behind the home. And as you said, it's enough of a slope that they're not likely to build anyway.
Right.
Because
What I mean by that is there's,
is the thought that that the way that becomes a usable backyard is filling in and retaining walls?
Yeah, you would have to do tree removal, additional retaining walls
And fill to make that a usable backyard.
Correct.
You could, it would be expensive, but you could.
Yeah,
And so I think that would be the argument for us requesting it, the line to get moved further, not all
No,
the way.
yeah, that's what
but further.
I'm saying. The line as it is, it allows for a usable backyard with tree removal, fill, retaining walls.
Well, and this would include tree removal for construction too, right? They would be able to cut down to that point. Whereas if we restricted it, they wouldn't be able to for the construction project either.
Correct.
Right,
So it'll preserve the trees that exist there, not just short term, but longer term. Or not just restrict the owner from cutting them down, but from the builder from cutting them down as well.
so it does seem worthwhile to move it somewhat further forward.
Yeah, especially when you're saying it's the bottom of the ravine.
Yeah.
It's literally the most you could get, so. Yeah, so I guess,
So it's a conversation with the board, from where it is halfway between I guess the limit of work and where it is now.
Could you move your cursor to where that would be?
Yeah.
That
About
would be
Approximately.
probably
right between
Out there,
so somewhere,
Lot
somewhere right
there.
between here.
seems fairly reasonable, allowing some space for backyard.
I don't know exactly what contour that
yeah,
is.
I could figure that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna guess roughly between where it says lot 1,
Yeah, that were the one.
Yes.
right,
Give or take,
right before the one,
right before the.
and then similarly, kind of right
Hmm.
across where the T is,
Hmm.
and then up and over.
Does anyone think that's reasonable or any other thoughts of? Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, I would like to see the line moved closer to the dwellings, and I think that location seems reasonable.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay,
Would it
Uh,
be possible for me to speak? I'm Jonathan Silverstein, the applicant's counsel.
go ahead, I guess.
Thank you. And I certainly understand the board's thoughts and appreciate your sentiments on this. I guess I would just note that the area that we're already proposing to restrict is significantly greater in area than the area that would be disturbed under a conventional subdivision. So I would argue that we're already more than mitigating the impact, if you will, of the waivers, which I think, make good planning sense anyway. And the proposed line really, it takes up a good chunk of the relatively flatter area in the back, beyond that steep slope. So that if there was a desire, for instance, to put a patio or a pergola or a, standalone deck or a gazebo or something, that wouldn't go on the side of that slope anyway, unless, as you said, you decided to fill it all in and put in retaining walls, which would, I don't think be environmentally sensitive, and it would certainly be much more costly. So I would just ask if the board could consider leaving a little bit more of that flatter area in the back available for prospective purchasers of the lots.
So from a planning perspective, I'm gonna have a difference of opinion. I think the waivers that the board is granting as far as within the public interest, that the topography of the property, being able to construct something in that flat area, which there's only one, and that's somewhat the flat area on proposed lot 1. Lot 2, it is not very flat to begin with. The tree removal and the grading that would have to be done to even get down to the bottom of the ravine, would need to be significant, and I don't see it's a challenging site, and I don't think it's the board's responsibility to gauge its waivers based on whether something is mitigated or not. It's whether it's within the public interest, and I think from the very steep slopes and the preservation of this natural area, the trees, the slopes, the ravine, that the public good is that there be less impact from what could really be significant tree removal and significant grading to be able to even get down that slope to begin with.
I certainly understand your point. I guess I would just say that I've been in plenty of steeply sloped wooded lots where people have a set of stairs going down to a walking path going where they then lead it to a little clearing and they have a fire pit or a gazebo or something. I mean, I don't think we're talking about going in and necessarily clearing and leveling the entire area. But if the thought is, which I think I heard, leaving some usable area for lawn elements, then I guess I'm just asking for consideration of leaving enough to make it actually usable.
How do you define enough?
I mean,
Yeah,
we
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry, what?
Jonathan. I also, I do understand there are a lot of properties that have steep slopes and wooded areas. A Nurse Neck Hill is, a great example, and, there, people do put, stairs that, go down and you have a little clearing. I don't necessarily have an issue with, that proposal. It probably is very beautiful. It would take more thought and more conversation than to try and frame that into words in a decision.
In the course of
Then-
this meeting?
That cannot be done in the course of this meeting, definitely. But I think if that is something that the board wants to have a further conversation about, then, it's up to the applicant whether they would allow it, go through the rest of the decision, but allow a continuance, and then I can have further conversations with Attorney Silverstein and Robert and try and frame that so that it does allow something minimal, such as stairs, going down, or maybe it's defining just a corridor where something can happen in a small outdoor seating area or something. I don't know, but
I guess I wasn't anticipating, a specific design review because frankly, where my clients aren't going to be developing these lots. So I don't think we're in a position to propose anything specific. I was more thinking in terms of how far the line gets moved. We thought that the line we proposed was, significantly greater than, a proportional to the waivers we were requesting. I hear that, there's disagreement on that. And I guess my request would be maybe split the difference between moving the line as far forward, which I think would effectively preclude any reasonable use of that back area from where we had originally proposed it. So maybe, splitting the difference and just not moving it quite as far forward, so that whoever does end up buying the lot isn't so hemmed in, basically having everything from the bottom of the slope backwards restricted, and not being able to put in any sort of recreational or outdoor features on the lot. That would be my request, and obviously it's in your discretion. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but
I thought it was my feeling that we had already split the difference by proposing the line between the bottom of the ravine and the retaining wall shown on the plan, rather than putting it right behind the retaining wall shown on the plan and making the entirety of the steep slope portion be preserved. I don't know if others have any similar feeling about it.
No, I mean, I hear the concerns and I understand them. I would want to see the line where we had proposed it.
I'm also think that the line where we thought it should go or be moved to was appropriate, given other waivers were being requested and what.
So I'll just ask a question. Given that there aren't any design plans, we're not looking at something that somebody might do. There's no way to affect the kind of minimal disruption wording of the, there's just,
I don't know. It seems like it ought to be theoretically possible to describe some kind of stairs that winds between the trees and some kind of small clearing area, but I don't know how to craft that on the fly in the middle of the meeting.
I don't
We
think you
can't
can.
you
No,
can't,
can't do
because
that now.
because we don't know who might do what. But I just want to make sure that, I know that there's no disturbed zones and there's levels of disturbance in the NRC.
Yeah, that just doesn't.
I know it doesn't, there's no corollary to that.
It's, well, it's a model, but again, I don't see how we would apply it during this meeting.
There are no wetlands.
Right,
being
so I just wondered if there was something that was similar to that, but apparently there isn't. And in light of that, it would seem that my opinion would be that the board should stick to what it felt was reasonable for protecting the interest of the surrounding area.
Could I maybe propose one option for how to get at this? If there could be language in the condition that indicates the eventual purchaser or developer of the lot can submit a request for modification under section 81W to propose specific improvements to the backyard area, something along those lines.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
that-
welcome to propose
That
it.
makes me feel better.
Yeah.
same
Okay.
here.
That's great. I appreciate it.
So they need to redo the plot plan that shows,
They would, somebody would
And send it to us.
actually file for a modification of the definitive subdivision plan.
Okay.
To amend that area to specifically allow a level of tree removal, grading,
Right.
and maybe a structure.
I meant right now, they need to redo the plot plan that they presented to us.
No, no,
According to
the,
what we've asked for.
oh, yes, yes,
Because they need to move the line
yes.
closer to the home.
That
Okay.
would be reflected in, I think it's like condition 8 or something when we get
Okay.
there, that's
That's
where
fine.
it would be
Yep.
added. And then, as Attorney Silverstein said, there'll be an additional language that,
And,
you know,
and we need to obviously approve where that line is when we see it.
Well, yes, but
Um,
if we trust Elizabeth to understand what we discussed at the meeting, we can.
I trust Elizabeth.
I trust
That's not the question.
Then we
So-
don't have to come back to one of our meetings, but
I'm fairly certain I know where the line needs to go. We
Okay.
can bring up the plan and, draw it, or, maybe Robert can, or no, I can bring up the plan and we can
I think
draw it on
you
there.
kind of outlined it.
you were-
Yeah.
Yeah, you did it. That's fine.
It basically right beyond the word, lot, down
Yeah. and can
by the T.
swing in a little there where this line goes, where the retaining wall
Yep,
goes really
yep.
close.
So it
but
would,
yeah,
yeah,
this
it would come
goes-
straight down,
up and down.
where,
Yeah, okay.
lot and the T is.
Yeah, yeah,
And
perfect.
then, come over and go where the T is in lot and connect up to the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Okay, so that was that first question. In format, we will unbold,
Yeah, formatting.
we'll unbold all those, that's formatting. Again, just clarification and language, I don't know what, I'm not sure what this,
Oh, so subdivision control law isn't well defined. As the comment says, I think we meant subdivision rules and regs there, but you can figure that out. It's not substantive, it's just a language issue.
okay? All right, I'll clean that one up. And this is just, again, phrasing to, there's no substantive change, it's just phrasing of the waiver. A waiver is requested. I don't know if you can see this well enough.
I can't see that.
I have it here, if that helps, but it's just about regularizing the language between one waiver request and the next.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so she added, a waiver is requested. On the grounds. That the vehicular and pedestrian traffic volumes on a 2-lot subdivision are not such. As to warrant the need for any street lighting.
Okay,
I moved the language around a little to make each
So,
condition,
yeah,
each
so
waiver.
this one, a
request be more
waiver
like
is
that.
requested on the grounds that. So it was just,
Makes it active.
makes it an active waiver.
okay, okay.
Again,
You could just tell me where you're at, like what section you're at when you.
I'm on item 6,
Waiver number
Thank you.
6, yeah.
waiver number 6.
Okay, thank you.
So waiver number 6 is one of the new, actually waiver, I believe it's waiver number 5, street lighting. And waiver number 6, which is the percent grade that Robert talked about,
Right.
are 2 waivers that the board did not discuss previously.
Mhm.
The waiver to street lighting is a common waiver that the board does grant, and I think it is within the public interest not to have street lighting for 2-lot subdivision. And then the percent grade, CPW engineering does not have an issue. There isn't a substantial difference between a 2% grade and a 5% grade, but it is beneficial from a stormwater drainage management perspective to allow the pervious pavement and the 5% grade.
Okay.
Then we get into the actual conditions. Again, there's just formatting. Formatting comments.
There was a real thing under condition number 19.
I'm not there yet.
Okay,
Condition 14 deals with the relocation of the utility pole.
you didn't say which utility pole. Is there only the one utility pole?
They're only proposing relocating one utility pole where the proposed.
But there are
roadway
no
is
other
in.
utility poles on their frontage.
No.
Then in that case, it's clear which utility pole.
Okay,
Okay.
there's only one utility pole that needs to be relocated. And, the applicant shall submit a water utility design in accordance with, it is CPW. Water.
Oh, it
Sewer?
was, see, I was right to ask which division.
Yes.
I got it wrong. Number 19A, it says
19.
water existing service infrastructure.
So it's gonna be.
Something is wrong there.
It's, existing shouldn't.
Oh, okay, that
Water-
fixes it.
Utility work insufficient, water service infrastructure can be assessed, updated. And constructed in accordance with the water and sewer division design and construction standards.
That was not substantive. Just a,
I don't know why water and sewer division italicizes. water use impact report or water customer
But
data
it's just-
sheet, they do.
It's just
Um,
formatting, it's not important.
20 is, an oversight on my part, should be Walden Street.
And the next substantive thing was under condition number 39.
Anything else is standard. But before we get to 39, to the point regarding the restricted envelope. We're back to condition 6. So it would be adding condition 6.
I've prepared some language. If it's helpful, I could read it and then send it to,
You go ahead, if you would like to go ahead and read it, that's fine.
um.
So we're
So
talking
it's 6C, it
Yep,
would say the proposed building and tree removal restriction areas shall be as determined by the board during the April 29, 2025 public hearing session and shall be shown on the definitive subdivision record plan sheet 2. Modification of these restriction areas may be requested to accommodate landscaping improvements and modest accessory structures in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 41, Section 81W.
yeah, that sounds
Right,
that's
yeah.
good.
That's
Okay.
fair.
Okay, I'll email it to you. Thank you.
And then Sue 39,
Is
so,
that supposed to be the lot? I don't know what the unit is.
so all drainage and utilities applicable to the lot being occupied shall be installed in the roadway completed to binder course to access the dwelling.
Ah, okay.
Um, yes, there is an engineering division at CMLP. And I'll go through and make sure it's consistent where there's CMLP engineering division, there's CMLP line division, which is the actual workers. So I'll make sure that it's consistent throughout the decision. I think the only other thing is, just, it's the signature block. And, appeal period block for the town clerk.
So I guess with that, is there any other comments from the board before I open up to public comments related to this? No, okay, so I'll now open the floor to public comments related to, I guess, I don't know how long Rob's been there, but I guess we should have made a note of that at some point. And anyway, moving on from that,
We can look at
the recording.
the
figure out where it came
recording
in.
and it'll be documented in the minutes when Rob joined the meeting.
Awesome. So with that, I'll open the floor up to public comments related to the draft decision. There's any public comments. Let's see, go ahead.
I just had a question. John Yang, 618 Walden Street. And I apologize if this is somewhere in the text. I had a question about the easement that appears between 61B and 618 Walden Street. Is that a requirement for the proposal, or is that a FYI, or what is that exactly? Is it easement for access and utilities? It's a little triangular spot on Walden Street between the two lots.
Yes, sir, that's an existing easement. That easement currently exists, if it's the one I'm thinking of.
You're saying that's an existing easement?
You're talking about the one that encompasses the neighboring driveway there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was an existing. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. No,
This one right here?
I'm wrong about that.
That one right there, the little, tricon.
No, so we ended up proposing that for the benefit of the lot there. Because as it currently exists, the neighboring driveway goes through this lot. So we wanted to provide, a legal mechanism for that to continue.
Okay, as far as the plan goes, is that a required element of the plan or?
Yes.
Okay, and that's somewhere in the text that you were, okay.
So just for, the board, but for, your knowledge, these plans, once they're finalized, get, endorsed. They get signed after, if there's no appeal, then they get recorded at the Registry of Deeds.
Mhm.
And these easement areas and like the restricted, area on the plan, those become actual, recorded items, at the Registry of Deeds for these properties and, those properties as they're being created. Those easements and restricted areas will be referenced as part of this plan, also referenced on those deeds for those properties. So for, for this area, this plan will specifically reference a access and utility easement for the benefit of, and it will specifically state, that, access and utility easement.
Okay. And that's when the plan is recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the actual layout of the road right of way and the creation of those lots does not happen until the plan is endorsed and recorded at the Registry of Deeds.
Okay,
They don't exist until that happens.
so that's like an automatic type of easement generation thing?
That will be something that the applicant, will include as part of the
Okay.
recording of this plan. As it's shown on the plan, it will say, access and utility easement for the benefit of the adjacent lot.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Or concerns or comments? Okay, so with that, we move for a vote, I guess, related to this.
Yep, so it would be, a motion and second, to, grant the definitive subdivision, and the 6 waivers, as with conditions as outlined in the decision as amended, this evening, and to authorize the, town planner to sign, on behalf of the board.
I move that.
I second that.
And we'll do a roll call vote, start with Rob,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Abby,
Aye.
Linda,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes,
Sue,
Aye.
and I am also a yes. So with that, that is unanimous. And awesome, so that's all set.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all. Appreciate all your work with this.
With that,
Thank you, Robert.
we will move to our 7:05 agenda item. The mixed use bylaw amendment zoning framework and discussion with consultant.
And Emily, and this is online.
Good evening, everyone.
So, Emily, I don't know if you want me to bring up the memo or if you want to bring up the memo so you can control the flow.
I have the option to share, so I'm happy to bring it up, and walk, if that makes sense, walk it, you all through what it is and why it is, and how your discussion tonight would be helpful. So again, for the record, Emily Ennis of Ennis Associates, and we are working on an update to the combined business residence bylaw, section 4.2.3, to make it a more effective mixed use bylaw. After we last met, we were talking about the general direction of the zoning, and I was getting ready to draft it. And as I started that draft analysis, I realized I still had a lot of questions for you. So this is the document that I have in front of you today is an analysis of the existing zoning bylaw in the white text. And then what I've done is under each section of the bylaw, I've identified the questions that I have for you. Went over this with Elizabeth and Christine and Sue at our last check-in. And where we're going is after tonight, assuming that we have a general agreement on most of this, I will start putting together draft text. We have a public meeting on June 17th where we would like to share the draft text and maybe some of the outstanding issues. If there are things that you still have questions about after this meeting that you would like more public input on. So I'm going to start with the first section. The combined business residence is allowed in the following districts, which are listed here. And in the case of the limited business districts, they are specific to certain sites. So one of the first questions is this still where you want to allow this use? And as we go through, you may not want to answer it now. What I thought I'd do is I'd just go through the questions and then we can come back because some of your answers may depend on later sections. So question number 1 is the geography. Do these all still make sense? Then question number 2 is part of the definition. So you're going to see each section. Now we're going to the 4.2.3.1, point 2, etc. So we're taking it one statement at a time. So the first current requirement is that each such unit, meaning the residential unit that is part of the existing commercial or potentially new commercial, each such unit has to be structurally part of the commercial building, having common walls, foundation, roof, and floor. So this implies that the residential use is an accessory use to potentially an existing building that has commercial in it, right? You have to have the commercial in order to have the residential. The way the language is structured, I initially read it as being only appropriate for existing buildings. There's some language later on that we'll see that suggests that you might want to use it for new mixed-use buildings. That is my understanding. With that, and I want to confirm that, also, are there any situations in which one or more residential units might be allowed in a separate building or buildings on the same parcel? In other words, if you're looking at these parcels or the areas, you're thinking of a mixed use or even a commercial only building that is fronting the principal street, there may be parcels that have sufficient depth to allow another building behind that. So you could have a commercial use at the front, a residential use on top, or a residential use in a separate building at the back. Sorry, I didn't realize it hit the board there. So is that of interest? And then finally, again, some parcels may be deep enough, and this is particularly important, I think, for West Concord Village, where there is a requirement to have the commercial on the ground floor. Some parcels may be deep enough to allow commercial on the ground floor, fronting the principal street, allowing for the active use. That can be really important in especially the village environment. But the building would have enough depth to allow residential on the ground floor behind that commercial use. So with these questions, I'm trying to get to the level of flexibility that we would want to allow in the zoning regulations. And one of the reasons I bring that last piece up is in another community I was working in, we had a developer ask us some questions, and one of the things that he stated was he was looking to do some residential projects in that community, and that it was easier for him to build accessible uses, i.e. residential that is accessible to somebody with physical disabilities on the ground floor. It would be easier for them to access. And so he asked the same question I'm asking you now. Then the next section is, right now, your requirement is for a development of four or more units, at least 20% of the dwelling units and no less than 1 unit are available as affordable housing. So 1 unit out of 4 is a 25% requirement. And this, the way this is currently written is at 4, 8, 12, because everything is being rounded up at those multiples of 4, it's actually a 25% requirement rather than a 20% requirement. So I went through the rest of your zoning to see how else you had handled affordable units in the rest of the zoning. Doesn't mean we're bound to that, but I was looking for, is there a level of consistency? So the next section of the bylaw requires that 20, which is the combined industrial residential, requires 20% of the units be affordable, but allows a reduction 10% in exchange for affordable rent for industrial or non-retail use. Your MBTA Communities Act has threshold of 10 or more units with 20% provided at 80% AMI. Your residential cluster development and your planned residential development actually have density bonuses for affordable uses. So the question I have for you, and it's going to come up in a later section, is how would you like to think about affordability requirements here? So one question I had is obviously affordable housing, providing that is critically important. Units eligible for the SHI are not the only way to accomplish that. So, and I'm worried that a threshold of 4 units may actually be acting as a deterrent for the use of this, especially when you look at other areas of town that have different thresholds. So just putting that out there. I think we already talked about 4.2.3.3, which is your current open space requirement, and it is onerous and complex. There's just some background information here. So one thing is that open space is not actually defined in your bylaw, or at least not in the main definition section. So the question I have for you is, what is your goal for the open space requirement? Because there can be multiple goals. So one is controlling the intensity of the building on the site, right? If you're requiring open space, it means you're not having building there. Are you looking to have that open space landscaped for aesthetics or to manage stormwater or reduce heat island effect? The idea of resiliency that we talked about when we were doing the regs earlier, or late last year rather. Do you want that open space to be publicly accessible for customers of the commercial use? In other words, if it's perhaps it's a cafe and you want to have open space available for outdoor dining or just a seating area, or do you want it to be, or do you want it to be privately accessible for tenants of the buildings? And then if you want it to be privately accessible, there is a difference between privately accessible open space to individual units, such as a balcony, or privately accessible for all tenants of the building and common, such as maybe a terrace or a deck. So understanding your goals for open space allows me to tailor the draft zoning. So depending on that goal, we could talk about limiting impervious surfaces, requiring a minimum amount of open space per unit, which could either be tied to the unit, such as a balcony, or aggregated as common space, such as a ground floor terrace or roof deck. 4.2.3.4 establishes special permit waivers for to allow in exchange for affordable housing, or where more than 10% of the dwelling units are available as affordable housing, the board can grant a special permit to allow reductions in open space, increase in height, decrease in the number of parking spaces, and the requirements for that. The tricky part of this is that the waiver is allowed for 10% of affordable housing, but the zoning requires 20%. So you're creating a waiver for something that is less than actually the requirement. So love the idea of the waivers and the flexibility, build that into zoning all the time because of, you get lots where the topography or the shape of the lot or whatever is actually preventing what you're trying to do. So I think it's important, but we ought to think about how we want to set those thresholds. So for example, you might tie the flexibility for height to an affordability bonus, or you might tie the flexibility for ground plane elements, lot coverage, open space parking, for something like the lot conditions that affect the layout of the components. So again, thinking about your goals relative to the development standards here, and then how we put all of those together. So with that, I am going to stop talking and I'm happy to jump back to I'm just going to move all the way back up to the top here, but happy to jump to any of the sections and hear your thoughts on the questions that I've raised. So we don't, again, because we've got a public meeting, we don't have to solve everything tonight, especially if there's something that you would like public input on. It's helpful for me to know because I can structure the questions of the public meeting to address the areas where you want more input.
I can just kick us off and just starting with the first couple of questions. I would think that more so in reading the 4.2.3.1 questions, that, you know, prefer to keep residential uses an accessory to an existing building. I mean, probably, but also it would anticipate the building of new buildings potentially. Simply because, you know, I was just looking at a map of some of those districts, and though they are small, their use may not be optimal. And that they could be a good place to put housing on, you know, if it's an existing one-story building, there's no reason why it wouldn't anticipate tearing that down and starting over. Separate buildings, again, more flexibility, provided it meets what the goal of, you know, the rules are. And establishing what the goals are is probably important, but I know in West Concord, the goal is to keep the vital streetscape. So the idea of an accessory building being behind doesn't, I don't see that as harmful in any particular way. I mean, right
or
now,
at the back of it,
Yeah.
or a single building, but at the back of it, leaving enough commercial space in the front,
Right.
same day. Yeah.
Right. Right, you know, accessing an accessible, you know, an accessible unit on the back is a good, seemingly good thing to have, even if it's not the sole, you know, use of the ground floor, you know, so. Where prohibitions are too restrictive to accomplish what the town would like to have happen, those are things that would be great to start to revise, I would think. And not be artificially restricted by what we've put in place, because as you've dug real deep and you can see things are broken.
That's why you asked me to join you on this effort, right? You already knew that, but it's good for me to dig a little deeper and have a conversation with you.
I'll just keep going if no one has any other comments. I think my mind works sequentially, so it's easier for me to just do it this way. With regard to the 20%, you know, the 20, which is actually 25% for small, I don't know what other communities have done, but the way I always looked at it, which never really made sense to me, this never really made sense to me. The federal government says 1 through 4 is a single family house. So if that doesn't if you can get a single family loan to build a 4-family thing, I'm not sure why Concord draws the line as 4-family being some multifamily threshold that has, you know, significant restrictions. So I don't see a reason not to tweak that requirement simply for the goal of generating more housing. Where it's otherwise possible, and it's a question that I've always wondered, and that may be a better discussion for the public hearing, but it is something I've always wondered of whether this was written to prevent housing from being built as opposed to trying to facilitate actual affordable units, and I've always had that question.
So I can't answer that question. This was adopted, you know, during my Boxborough sabbatical. But I think what the board does now have is the economic feasibility analysis that was done for the MBTA communities. And that's where that threshold was established based on you know, that whole economic feasibility analysis of being, you know, 20% for 10 units or more. So I think, you know, Emily and I could, you know, look at that economic feasibility analysis and maybe, you know, you have 20% for 10 units or more. Maybe it's 10% for 5 units or more.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's, but.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I think
There's
that'd
a
be
way to
instructive
get
for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Linda.
I agree that is a great way to go. I have also seen that incentive thing, but it may not work. The incentives where they might work in the two places in your bylaw that have them, they may not work here because you've got the additional complexity of this is really infill development. You're trying to also keep that development consistent with other building styles and development patterns that already exist in those areas. So I think using the EFA, I just wanted to check on the consistency level and your thoughts on that. But I agree with Elizabeth that we could look to the EFA and see how we structure that.
I think also, that wasn't mixed use. And so I think we also need to think that, certainly what I've seen in the current environment is that, we probably don't have the same economics of, mixed use, yeah, and residential plus commercial as you would have with 100% residential. So I might even think that, especially with what we've seen with the PRDs, that maybe even 20% might be a little aspirational and not necessarily as pragmatic if we want to again exploit this opportunity. And it's again, so many things that are infill are going to be less than 10 units. So we're
Correct.
So I don't know why we would have requirements for less than 10 units, but once you get to a higher scale, then that's again, I think a different kettle of fish, and I'm not sure that MBTA it's going to be interesting, but I don't know how informative it really would be.
And you're probably right. It is, more costly to do, commercial development. It's more costly to do mixed use development because of building code requirements. When you have a commercial space and a residential space, and it is to do just residential.
And I'm thinking also of MCI Concord and, how this will ultimately interface to some extent with what's planned there. So, that they're sort of will be going along a bit of a parallel path. So we'll keep our minds open on that and have some more thoughts, I would think, because there's probably some discussion about that having mixed use. As well.
And I can also, I can reach out to the consultant that did the economic feasibility analysis and say,
great.
what would be the cost to take this, because he has all of the data and translate this to mixed use. And while the planning budget, all budgets for next fiscal year, the new type, we do have a little bit, or maybe I can look for another grant opportunity to do an economic feasibility analysis for mixed use.
And I do think some of his examples that were used were more like 60-unit buildings as opposed to 10 units. So we might also want to think of some scale between 10 units, 35, 60 or whatever, because I think you'd have different economics in that regard as well.
And smaller ones as well. When I spoke with, when I met with Elizabeth and Emily, I brought up the work we had done a couple of years ago on the question of affordability requirements for combined business residents, and that didn't come in the end to town meeting. But we had looked at what to do with allow payments in lieu for fractional units of some size or another. And I thought that there was some real promise in that, even though it needed more work. And I'm sure Emily will have that in mind as she's moving forward.
Yes, yes, I looked at that, and thank you, Sue, for bringing that up. It was extremely helpful. I think that could absolutely continue to be part of the conversation, whether It's fractional units. Some communities do that. Some communities also allow it for entire units, but then you're not distributing the affordable housing units throughout the community. It's being concentrated. But having said that, some communities have found that it is useful for them being able to create affordable housing, maybe on town properties. So, they are. The tools are all valid tools. It's just how each community wants to use them. So,
And the other piece, when, affordable housing is not the only affordable in the community. When the, industrial business residential went in, that was specifically drafted to accommodate Brookside Square. And at that time, there was all of the single-story funky old warehouse industrial makers type space that was back there. And that bylaw was specifically written to try and create affordable, industrial, maker space. So there's no reason why the board can't also think of, besides affordable housing, to implement something similar to, that section of affordable commercial space, which is, from what I understand, just as needed as affordable housing to, keep a community vibrant.
Mhm.
So that might be, something else to think about.
So we have used that as an incentive in other communities. For example, I'm trying to think of the exact language, but it was something like a reduction in rent for X number of years for 50% of the commercial space or something like that. So if that's of interest, I could pull a couple of examples of how that could work, and maybe that's also part of the community discussion. What combination of affordable housing and affordable commercial space would be attractive? So we could look at that.
Onward.
Yes.
Onward. Space.
Oh, actually, I'm gonna interrupt and circle back to the first item, which is not everyone may be aware of this. So I'll state it, to let people know the reason that in the West Concord Village District, the entire ground floor has to be commercial is that when the West Concord Task Force was writing those regulations, we could not figure out how to say commercial in the front, residential in the back is okay with the uniformity principle. That is the only reason. So if we are now smart enough, if Emily is knowledgeable enough to find a way to actually write that, that would certainly be an improvement in terms of allowing ground floor residential in a way that is accessory or not primary. I just wanted to put that up there for the record.
That's great. The next item is the open space.
Next item
Um,
is the open space, yes.
That this is true, that it is onerous. It again seems to be one of these things that I think was designed to keep what was there and not let anything change. But again, it doesn't make any sense. If you can't meet what's written with a reasonable lot in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't make sense to have rules like that. That said, all of these are good things to consider and should be. Mitigating the heat island is an appropriate thing for someone to do, and that can be a good reason why their open space is good enough for what they have, that kind of thing. So that's what I think.
Well, yes, but in the rare case of installing a green roof, it's not really open space as such. Nobody can, you might not be able to walk on the green roof, but
Right.
it's still mitigating the heat island.
Right,
Without being.
but it's something that the board should be able to consider,
Right,
as opposed to just these arcane, like really specific
Well, I think
goals.
that's the general kind of question is like, is the goal of this, like, landscape area for aesthetics, I kind of don't really buy, but the idea of controlling the intensity of the building site, mitigating impact on stormwater, heat island, things like that, there's ways to do that. I would say that those are important things to consider and to do them in a more effective, less way would be a goal that I would like to see kind of considered. Like, we're gonna talk about kind of some sustainability and environmental impact and that type of thing, as opposed to being like, you need a garden.
Right.
So can we just say that we would like to incorporate green development principles as opposed to open space requirements? And then, you know,
Well, I think, because, the board is planning on having, the public workshop later in June. And I think, again, I don't think landscape areas for aesthetics,
That's like my opinion of
I
like,
don't-
what
I
are
don't-
what are
yeah.
my priorities
It's
here?
whether you're talking about green space or open space,
Yeah.
I landscaping for aesthetics is just something you do to make the project look good. But these other items, I think you can have that be part of the, so I think at the next, not next week, your next meeting. Well, maybe, I don't know, I've talked to Emily about this, but having the conversation, with Sue is, how should that public workshop be? How should that be framed? I can see this being one of, a question. Please, I'm sure Emily's worked with, it's, on-demand voting, you can create the question, please rank these in, your order of importance. And, get that feedback on, is, green space and open space, from a planner's perspective. I think if it's mixed use, having open space that's publicly accessible, for, the public and for customers, as well as having, a little open space area for the tenants of the building to be able to have, a little fire pit and a barbecue and, whether, I think those are two elements of that makes a good mixed use project. And then the heat island and managing stormwater. Those are things that are just inherent elements of a good project. And, somebody is going to be going through site plan review, you have your site plan criteria, those are all elements of a good project. So I think that, open space requirement is more of that use area and what makes a good project for a mixed use development for the commercial and the public, and then as well as the tenants.
If we're going to be asking people for their opinions, I think we should ask them separately about open space versus green space. Because a fully paved patio is not the same thing as a spot of grass that you can sit on, and different people have different ideas. I mean, as far as landscaping for aesthetics, my goal is never to live anywhere where I can't see a full-size tree. And that's aesthetics, but maybe it isn't. There's been a lot of research into the value of nature for human psychology and mental health. If Concord weren't such a small place, there's been lots of work in urban planning on the residents should always be in close distance of some green space, but it doesn't have to be on site if there's a park within this amount of space. But Concord is so small, I'm not sure how applicable that is.
To Linda's point, I think
Yeah.
using the term green space is better than open space.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we could do at the public meeting is we could do exactly that. We can do the polling. We can give examples of definitions. We can give pictures. So people aren't relying on the text here to give their opinion, and I think that could, this would be a nice question to ask people about, their priorities and why they have those priorities, just hearing the discussion that you're having today. And then that could help us get to the fact that you don't have a definition of open space in the bylaw. One thing that we would need to look at is if we did add a definition in the main definition section, would that have an impact on anything else that you already have where open space is referred to? So we might want to think about that as well. Maybe the way to get around that is to define green space and just leave open space alone. So.
That's not bad. I will note that a lot of surveys have gotten answers from the public saying, in terms of public space, we want more benches to sit down on as we're walking down the street. That would not be relevant for tenant space, but benches can be on grass and benches can be on pavement. But it's certainly a request we've gotten an awful lot. I mean, we, the town in general, not we, the planning board specifically.
Anything else on open space?
Well, it is ridiculous that basically every project is requesting a waiver from the requirement. But we kind of already said that.
Speaking of waivers, how do you know how you would like to think about waivers? Is this another question? Again, I put out sort of general principles of how you might think of it as, how do you tie the waiver to something that is meaningful for that waiver? And there are many different ways to do this, but I wanted to check and see if you already had some thoughts. This is something else we need to talk about with the public, or if we just put, I've certainly put in general, the planning board, basically the language that you already have here, that the planning board can create a waiver for these development standards if it's in this exact language in harmony with the general purpose and intent, etc. So, I guess what I'm asking is how tight do you want the thresholds to be, or how well defined do you want the thresholds to be when setting up a waiver? And this isn't a waiver from other dimensional standards. It's generally, the way I would look at it is it's a waiver, although you've got the dimensional standards here. So it could be a waiver from dimensional standards, or it could also be a waiver from development standards.
My question in reading this one was, the town has a history of coming up with what it considers good incentives that don't do anything.
Right.
So
Yeah.
have you seen anything that actually works? Because that might be useful in the discussion of saying, look, that's sort of a public question of, is the public comfortable with, if you said, look, the existing one says 40 feet, if it goes to 50, that will produce something, and that's sort of something tangible we can talk about. But when you say, oh, height waiver, everyone starts to look at what Novo's sizing and saying, well, 7 stories is too much, so no height waivers. Where no one's realistically talking about that, but I don't know how to frame it in a way that's structured for a public hearing, absent like a couple of proposed, other towns have done it and seen a certain increase in their housing production because people are using this kind of waiver.
So we can look into that. We have structured menu options too that says, for example, for height, that if you do X number of public benefits, whether it's affordable housing or the ground floor commercial or etc., then you get Y amount of height increase. And you, the developer, can choose what is more financially feasible to you at the time that you're proposing this, right? Because economic cycles happen. So we've done it that way. We can do a little research into which ones have worked more effectively than others. I mean, height is generally considered to be good. Unfortunately, it and the other really good one, which is waivers of parking requirements, are also the two that are most likely to cause community concern. I think for, obvious reasons, right? Those are some of the things we talk about most. So I don't like to default to those unless we've got another way of thinking about it. But often if you can have a conversation about how this waiver allows for something that the community wants even more, that can be a really good discussion to have with the community. So we can do some additional research and maybe create some scenarios for public discussion on the 17th of June.
And I would also be interested if you are able to find any data on, for example, step type waivers, where along the property line, the height can't be higher. But
Yeah.
the further you go back into the property, the higher it can be, so that the impact on the surrounding neighborhood is far less than if it was
Yep.
global height.
Yeah.
I do know, one example, somebody was discussing with me, the potential to get a height waiver to allow a building to go higher, let's say from 3 stories to 4 stories, if the footprint of the building got smaller and allowed for more green space and active space, public active space, on the ground floor. So I do know that is also one that somebody actually even asked me about.
You mean it's like a development proposal or?
Yeah.
it's a-
Like
yeah,
to,
no, that's-
to
that's
put, like
really-
to build like a residential unit on top of a commercial building that's smaller. But, and then provide green space and kind of like adding on to.
That question, we actually made a different choice in the case of 50 Baharrel. The original proposal was for 4 stories, and there was going to be much more green space on the property. But there was a lot of pushback on that, and in the end, it's 3 stories, and there's very little green space on the property.
Well, but that was a community conversation.
It was,
And that
yes.
had to
And it was
do
worth
with,
having, yeah.
had to do with, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and all of that. But
Or the
Yeah.
different location, it could be
But
different.
in a different location, that's part of that whole waiver conversation. And just to clarify, Emily, that waiver, in the zoning bylaw, whenever it refers to the board, it is.
Yep.
It is only talking about the zoning board of appeals.
Okay.
Where the planning board, it says the planning board.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, waivers are granted by the Board of Appeals.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not quite sure where to put it. If we're adjusting this, we should make sure that these projects don't have parking in the front of the buildings along the primary street. But we shouldn't be allowing that anywhere in business districts, period. So it's not specifically about combined business residents.
Right.
So, but still, that's something that we should fix. And we shouldn't allow it to continue to be a problem with combined business residents or any business.
Well,
So-
but you can take, the redevelopment of Paparazzi. They had to put the parking in the front because that was the only viable place for the on-site sewage disposal system.
Oh, well, in a case like that, that's what, special permits are for when your site does not allow for something due to other site characteristics, but as a default, all other things being equal, it should not be doable. I mean, they also had to, because in that particular area, they were required to have a 50-foot setback from the highway so that there wouldn't be an impact.
Off topic now, so.
So that's actually one of the reasons, you were talking about waivers for different conditions. That's one of the reasons that we set up these menu options, because then you have criteria for allowing specific waivers. But we can look a little bit further into the waiver types, and I could make I can provide some examples for that public discussion, and then we can get input on what people are thinking, and then come back to you with some suggestions. That was it. That was all I had to discuss. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed either at the previous meeting or this meeting that you want to make me to make sure that I keep in mind? Maybe it's additional questions for the public meeting or anything else you want me to keep in mind while doing the zoning. So I know you have other things on your agenda, so I don't want to take up all your time.
Quite a bit on the agenda. Unless anybody has any initial thoughts about the public meeting.
No,
Mhm.
okay.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will see you all soon.
So with that, we move on to administrative business. The first item on the agenda is public comment. General public comment is limited to up to 15 minutes with no more than 3 minutes allocated to any one speaker. General public comment is limited to those items which are not on the agenda, which includes any discussion of zoning bylaw amendments. So, is there any public comment? I see that Carol Spoy has her hand raised.
Yeah, I have a public comment that it has to do with what you just discussed. So do you want me to wait till later to make that public comment in regards to the combined business?
I think that's a great part to discussion to have at the public hearing itself, because we're,
Public
or
meeting.
the public meeting, I mean. In what day is that?
June
June
17th.
17th. Where we will go in depth into public concerns and questions about that matter.
So you don't want to discuss it any time before and get any public comments before June 17th, which is what, month and a half, 2 months away?
Right, because we're having the public, we're having the consultant review items and discuss what was on the agenda, but not having any more discussion as far as I'm aware related to it.
Yeah.
It's just, we're setting up the agenda for the public meeting, so we can get public feedback on our discussions, so that's scheduled thing, that's, yeah, exactly. So.
Okey-doke.
Yep. So is there any other questions or comments? Nope, so with that, we will move on to the 50 Sunnyside Lane lot release.
I will recuse myself.
Do you need just a motion of what we're doing?
We'll just let her recuse herself and then, I don't.
Oh, are we just moving right along without anything?
No,
No,
I'll
yeah.
give a brief update. So the definitive subdivision plan, the developer had a restricted covenant. And the last lot in that restrictive covenant is 50 Sunnyside Lane. To release that lot out of the covenant so it can be sold, the subdivision control law and the board's regulations allow them to post an alternative performance guarantee. And that has been posted as an irrevocable letter of credit in the amount for the remaining items that need to be completed for the subdivision. That's been reviewed by engineering for those items, along with the current interim as-built plan, the unit costs, and that's where the dollar figure comes from. So yeah, there's been no issues from town staff for releasing the final lot from the restricted covenant.
So we just need a motion to accept.
I move to accept the irrevocable letter of credit dated April 15th, 2025 in the amount of $42,813.08 and release lot 5B 50 Sunnyside Lane from the restricted covenant.
And if I can have you add and authorize the town planner to sign the lot release.
And authorize the town planner to sign a lot release.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Rob,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Abby,
Aye.
Yes.
Yeah.
and I, Andrew, am a yes, and Sue has recused herself, so we are all set. Okay. So now we will move on to discussing the 2025 ATM zoning bylaw amendments, follow-up discussion. And I believe you had some initial things to note before we get started.
Yes, so starting with Article 37, one of the items the building commissioner and I had talked about was specifically the proposed wording, no change in any use. Thank you. And after talking with the building commissioner, not using the word use, because if you were to go from, you know, retail to retail, it would be a new operator, a new owner, if they had a joint parking agreement. You know, he said, yep, he'd want to see a joint parking agreement, new signatures from everybody. So I think we said any change in tenant. So
Could we say tenant and or use in the unlikely event that someone turns their very own pizza shop into their very own gift shop? While staying the tenant?
You mean if they sign a
Yes.
lease as an individual as opposed to
Yes.
as a business?
Well, business is
Either
usually, a
way.
business is usually authorized to do any lawful business. So if it's, yeah, Pizza
Yeah.
LLC, it could be the pizza gift shop, yeah.
Yeah.
yes, so leave the word use, it would be
Tenant and or use.
use.
Yeah,
So well, I'd leave it to use and or tenant.
sure.
Good point.
Mhm.
That's not.
Very good point.
So that. So right now, it's, at your meeting next week, the board will have to, determine which items you feel you can, make your motion to town meeting for. And there may be some items that you, between now and town meeting, you have, tonight, next Tuesday, and then May 29th. You are required to provide, town meeting pursuant to the zoning act, your recommendation, whether it is written or verbally. You generally, you know, the board does a written, recommendation. That was the bazillion handouts, which there will be no more handouts. There will be the briefing book. Unfortunately, the deadline for the briefing book is May 6th. I have let the town moderator know that you are meeting on the 6th. They will have, if you do take any formal votes for recommendations, they will have it by 8 AM on the 7th, which is fine. But you know, for this article, and maybe the petition article, you may need to discuss it at the 6th, you may need to discuss it at your May 29th meeting. And then the board would need to make a verbal recommendation to town meeting on your action. So that's just to procedurally let you know how the process would play out. But at least for now, if the board agrees with that one change to the actual wording of the article, I can at least submit that. And at least that portion, that motion, would be printed in the briefing book.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I think it's a good comment.
Yep.
It's appropriate.
So I guess we should move on to discussing questions and comments. Oh, the other thing, we just want to note that before we start getting deeper into this, that one of the amendments is going to be subject, we're not going to discuss one tonight. I forget exactly which one.
So it's up to the board, but what I can give you for Article 46, which is the continuing care retirement community overlay district. I wish I could come up with a better acronym, but that I do know that the petitioner is working with town council and the select board. At the public hearing, there was the conversation about a development agreement to address many of the issues and concerns that were raised, which are more specific to an actual project and design and permitting for a project that aren't easily reflected in or should not be reflected in zoning. But there is, the conversation that the planning board had, and I believe even the select board had, having different assurances as things move forward with, adopting zoning. And that is how a development agreement make sure those assurances happen. So I do know that that conversation is happening. So I don't know if the board wants to postpone conversation on that warrant article unless you had specific questions, concerns, or issues about just the wording of the zoning article itself. And, you know, I can make a request to have the petitioner come to your meeting either next week or, you know, it's only a week away. I don't know if they're available or come to your meeting on the 29th.
Do you have a sense of the timeline of that process, how that's moving?
It is moving.
I see that Wendy has written.
Oh.
So Wendy Rivoli is your select board liaison.
So I thought I'd just give you a comment. The the select board is working on, Elizabeth, we're using the term memorandum of agreement, not a development agreement, because that would typically be with a developer. But I also wanted to let you know that the select board voted last night that we're not going to make our decision on this article until town meeting. So for what that's worth, we are going to be having them attend our select board meeting on May 12th as well. Just wanted to let you know.
Now, that's great to hear. I have not had time to go over it in detail, but when I first looked at the article, I noticed I had some concerns about the specific wording and that it was inconsistent with the way some things were phrased in other places in the zoning bylaw that were on the level of this should be fixed in the motion in a wordsmithing way, but was not substantive to the article. The substantive issues I have would hopefully be addressed by this MOA.
So I know the petitioner would be very happy to get your suggested edits.
I would be very happy to have 5 seconds, maybe after April is over, which isn't long now.
So you can
Yeah.
forward them to me and I can
Yes.
forward them to the petitioner. It's challenging with citizens petitions, because, the town, cannot, we are not the ones that are moving this article. The town cannot make an amendment to the petition article as part of the motion. The only way that can happen would be somebody were to, on the floor of town meeting, make a motion to amend, and then it goes through that procedural process. And, but I do know that, the petitioner is, very willing to, to work with the town and, as far as your, I don't want to necessarily call them wordsmithing edits because they're more than that, but they would be happy to review any of that.
I will get to that as soon as I can.
But I
So
think-
we have, there, it's, town meeting is not that far away. There's from a getting an MOU done, I'm very confident with, the council for the petitioner, and our town council who have done, similar, MOAs, in many communities, and similar MOAs that are done really well. So if it was any two different people, I would be concerned, but a month is actually quite a bit of time.
Well, I really think we need to wait until we get more information before we
Yeah.
have a discussion.
Yeah.
Because, we really don't know until we see that.
Yeah, so table that until,
Right.
Yeah, that would be my vote.
Yeah.
yeah.
So what I can do is I can reach out and have, invite them to your May 29th meeting,
Mhm.
which would be after the
After
May
that.
12th
Yeah.
select board meeting. And then have them come,
I think that's the most efficient.
give the board an
Yeah.
update. As far as, their presentation, at town meeting, will be significantly different. And I do know that the town moderator, is speaking with them about, their presentation. And having it be, you know, it will be significantly different. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
And we'll just have to
Yes.
verbally endorse it. If we decide to
Yeah.
endorse it, we'll just have to do it verbally.
So
Okay.
while, I don't think this board for the newer members, but I believe Linda remembers, you know, there have been town meetings where, you know, the board schedules a meeting, a half an hour
Mhm.
before town meeting to
Make a decision.
make its decision.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then verbally gives its recommendation at the
Right.
town meeting. That may be the case.
But hopefully if they present to us on the 29th, we'll be able to come out with some resolution.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe there will probably be significant resolution, at the select board's meeting on the 12th.
Great.
Good.
Yeah, because
Thanks.
my notes are most of the citizens' concerns or the public concerns. It would be really useful to look towards that
Yes.
document to be able to answer some of those questions. So,
Absolutely.
so I guess with that, we move back. Sorry, I just wanted to put that out there in case anyone was waiting with bated breath. So we've discussed the joint parking and the changes there. Were there any public comments related to?
Well, the
Yeah.
board hasn't talked about.
Yeah,
the
so
parking.
we'll move back to
So
joint parking.
Elizabeth and I met, obviously it needs some working, okay? I was really disappointed in the way that went at the public meetings, you can appreciate, okay? I guess I underestimated the reaction that we would get from some of the people on it. To me, it seems like it's a pretty simple little change, okay? And not a big deal, but in the,
Can I just say as a new member, it doesn't feel simple to me. I mean, when you kept saying this is just a simple little change, I was feeling like, well, what am I missing? Because it doesn't feel simple to me.
So I think a lot of, you know, the feedback and questions and comments, you know, Mark and I've met, you know, once, went over the presentation. And a lot of, the feedback and the questions that were created. Redefining the presentation in a different format, different, information and how it gets and how it gets presented in a different pattern, logically in a different
Right.
pattern. And then, I think changing.
we're gonna start,
Sort of.
we start with a little bit higher level. We're gonna talk about Envision Concord and why we're trying to do this, okay? You know,
What's the problem that,
Right.
you know, needs to be addressed?
Right.
What the current bylaw is. And then, you know, other comments actually pulling in. It's gonna make the presentation, you know, longer,
That's okay.
but pulling in, you know, like the text, the proposed text.
Right.
And having that up and explaining things, in a different structure, in a different order. So that's what we're working on.
That's great. I
And Pat,
agree. And I
let me tell you,
didn't mean
let
to
me,
criticize.
that's okay, but let me tell you why it's so simple, okay? The way it's set up right now is.
You're not gonna let go of the simple thing, are you?
Is that joint parking can only be done between non-competing businesses. So you can do a bank and a restaurant, okay? But you can't do two banks, you can't do two restaurants, you can't do a restaurant that's open for breakfast and one that's open for dinner, okay? Now, this is all done based upon a study that has to be done to determine that you can get adequate parking at those facilities. But all we're trying to do is make it a little bit easier for people and to reduce the amount of impervious substrates that have to go down now and the cost of parking, okay? You know, I should show a picture of Jim's parking deck over there. It's never used. Can you imagine how much that
No,
costs?
I get all that. I think that.
So
what
that's
you
why-
just
that's why it's so
described is
simple.
Going
Okay.
through the tiers of this, I think for
Well,
the uninitiated.
Well, I think you also start with the very basic proposition that joint parking already exists.
It does.
Mhm.
That's
I
right.
mean, I think that's almost like the baseline, is start with like, joint parking already exists. This is not something new that we are proposing. This is not a different type of parking that we don't already have in town. What we're trying to do is make the existing more efficient and more effective. And this is the change we're proposing to do
And
that.
I-
And if
and
I
I
think if
would-
you start with that this isn't a new type of parking we're adding. It already exists. It's not working well for this reason.
Yeah.
This is the change. But I will say, this is simple. It sounds simple to us. For the uninitiated,
We don't
you
need-
have no idea that joint parking
I
exists.
keep talking about Academy Lane, okay? I mean, you know.
I understand that, but I think,
Principle
yeah.
in competing things is nobody ever says there's never a reason to say something is simple, because if it really is simple, it's obvious it's simple. And if it isn't simple, then if you say it's simple, then you upset people. So one just doesn't need to say it's simple or not. One just says what one wants to
Okay.
talk about. But there is something that's new, which is that times have changed. And when we set this up with non-competing uses, the uses that didn't compete were different than they are
Yeah.
now, because people's hours are different and people are all over the place at all times of day and night. And why should we use different type of business as a metric
Yeah.
for who competes?
The question is,
Yeah.
you know,
It should be measurement.
when people don't understand what we're saying, and then we're getting it continuously, okay? You know, they're talking about how this is gonna change the complexion of Concord. I always said, you know, what are you talking about? It's gonna change the complexion of Concord. It's not gonna change the complexion of Concord. It's a simple little matter, okay?
You don't have to
So
say
if
it's.
I can-
It's not helpful.
But
You-
you
yeah.
could say it won't change the complexion of Concord.
To
just
Abby's-
Because it's already there.
To Abby's point, it's already there and the guardrails will still be there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I heard a lot
And they'll
about
be
was
Better.
the
Right.
guardrails. will
Because you'll
be
actually have
there.
parking studies.
Right.
This,
back up
this is an
instead of saying
existing type of
bank and
parking
restaurant,
that we're
fine,
trying to
50%.
improve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's,
also it will,
you know.
there's much better, it goes with the lease. Whereas right now, what does it go with? It's unclear.
Can you
Well, you
differentiate?
still need a contract, okay? It's-
Well, right, but our current language for whether what kind of contract you need is squishy, whereas
Right,
the new
yeah.
language is good language.
Right.
Yeah,
Can you differentiate parking in lots from parking on the street? I mean,
But this is only private parking.
Yeah.
this is
This is
only,
not street parking whatsoever.
I think people are really upset about street parking.
Right.
I don't think.
And
I can't blame you.
that's a conversation
But-
that the
Select
select
board.
board needs.
But I think that the point that we have to take into consideration is that what people are thinking, and this is kind of taking in the public comment, is that, yes, we understand you're talking about private parking, but if you make these changes to private parking, will it spill over and cause problems on the public parking?
We
So
should
when
look
we
at
say
Concord
we're
Academy,
just
right.
changing private parking, people say, yeah, and if you mess that up, then I can't park anywhere on Main Street because that lot's full and now people, so understand that's the concern when people are talking about, I understand it's private parking, but my public parking concern is X. I think they're concerned about the impact of changes to private parking on public parking, that those two things in the public's mind are interrelated and
Well,
flow
and they
together.
are,
So if you
this is
show
why
a
Mark.
picture of the parking lot,
Study.
lots of empty spaces. And a picture of the street at the same time of the day.
It's a good example of like
This-
the Fritz and Gigi parking lot of like, look at that at 12:30. And there are 15 spots that are open and every spot on the street is filled.
Right.
That's a good instance where, those are underutilized. Could the changes to joint parking make that private lot better utilized to relieve some of the burden on public
Exactly.
parking? That's what we're
very
not
fair.
communicating
That's
well.
what we're not.
We're not
Yeah.
communicating that well
Yeah.
to people.
Parking is such a flashpoint. Are we ever gonna overcome?
We're
it?
not gonna convince everybody, but I think we could do a better job of, there's a segment of the public who is going to just be opposed to this, and they have their reasons, and some of them are valid, and they're not convincible. There is the vast majority of the folks that are gonna be in that room at town meeting. This is going to be the first time they're engaging with this particular issue, and I think if we approach it in a way that is measured and clear, I think we have a huge ability to convince those people. We come to it, we're meeting people that they're reasonable, and if we can explain what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think they will come to the conclusion that, yeah, this isn't a huge overhaul. This seems reasonable, and I think we can convince people to be supportive of it.
I always look at town meeting, that by the time someone goes up to that con mic and even if they're just asking a question. Or they're at the question mic, you've already lost them. So they're asking questions in a way that are structured to reinforce what they're already thinking.
Right.
So it's gonna come up that, well, there's no parking here, so like, how will this impact? You know, it's phrasing it in that way that's gonna, and if you say, look, this is a private parking that might impact public, that reinforces what they've said, they're already thinking, and they're gonna sit down and vote no. But if you put it out there in advance and they're thinking about it throughout your entire presentation, that this is only about this one little issue that already exists, maybe they don't ask that question, and then you have a chance. That's,
Okay,
And
well,
with
So,
the stuff with
and,
parking.
and I also, think there's, some confusion that joint parking is not relief from parking.
That's the other thing I was gonna
So-
say, is that when
so
people,
I'll Think about,
yeah, well, Chris and I will work on
Yeah,
this,
it's-
and
Yeah.
then we'll bring it to you folks, you know, before.
yeah,
Okay.
cause, and I
Yeah,
think that's
different.
right, that was the other point that I was gonna make, is I think a lot of people, their primary beef is with parking relief,
Right.
generally, not joint parking
Well, and-
specifically.
and management of public parking.
Totally, 100%, and so acknowledging that, like, you know, these are the parking issues
Yeah.
that we have, this is the specific way we're going to address this one.
Mhm.
These other ones,
We-
I agree,
we
you know, I
have-
wanna be
we
able to
have-
park here, there, and
we have
there.
That's right, I agree.
Yeah, be like,
You can't find a place to
Yeah,
park.
yeah,
Okay.
you know, I'm circling the library
Yeah,
time, so,
right.
but acknowledging for people that problems exist, this. Joint parking is addressing this specific issue, not these other ones, so.
You know, your Fritz and Gigi analogy, that's just not something I'd ever thought about. That's a very clear analogy that there are, this would give more opportunities for off-street parking.
Well, and make it familiar to
Only if
people, because,
Choose to do joint parking, but
Yeah.
hopefully they.
yeah,
will.
but, I mean,
So
but
what gives
that's,
the opportunity?
but
Yes,
that's, it could help, because you have a situation where Cafe Nero comes in, instead of getting parking relief, they get joint parking for their staff. So it means now they have, these people aren't taking up 3 spots for the entire day in the public lot. The store owner is paying Fritz and Gigi to park behind it.
Mhm.
You know, and that's what this would allow.
And it obviously it goes on. If you
Yeah.
know, 30 Monument Square pays the church,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
$100,000
proper
bucks a
penny
year.
parks in Fritz and Gigi, and you
Right.
know, you have,
Yeah.
and making it tangible to people of like, that's just a great example of like. That's a lot that we've all, you know, you've circled in the Walden Street lot, and you're like, all of those parking spots are right there. As you drive around again, everybody who lives in Concord can relate to that example,
Yeah.
and that might be one where it's just a helpful demonstration for
Yeah.
people to see.
We'll get your input. So, thanks.
So thank you for stepping on that
Yeah,
landmine.
yeah, hang
Yeah,
in there.
yeah,
That was-
really.
that was painful.
No, I know it was, I know.
I'm sure it was.
Okay. I have broad shoulders.
So Article 38, housekeeping, as I stated, town moderator indicated that will probably be on the consent agenda. 39 is the ADU amendment, which they were also,
One comment. It's cross-referencing state law instead of putting a number. But
It was a good-
it was, but I think, yeah, I don't know. If it's-
If they put it on consent, take it. Okay.
Oh, were they talking about putting on the consent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, then never mind.
Not
yeah,
likely,
take it.
not likely on the consent agenda, but maybe on the consent.
Yes,
agenda.
yeah.
Okay,
Maybe.
yeah, no, it was just whether you cross-reference the minimums with state law as opposed to actually putting a number in there, which, yeah, either way. Um,
40, floodplain amendment,
Consent.
consent, which, I know, I think I told board, postcards along with individual maps were sent to all of those property owners. So did not get any, buddy emailing or calling me with questions, so I think, that's good. 41 is the wireless amendment.
We will have to take a position on that.
We will have to take a position on that, yeah.
Yes. Do we have enough information?
This is the first we've heard of it, right?
That was,
That night,
That night, yeah.
for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's a citizen's petition.
Yeah.
and So basically, that presentation is gonna be exactly what it is at town meeting. There's not gonna be any,
I'm not sure.
Personally, I didn't disagree with the content, the idea of having to do a study to prove there's no signal so that you can put it was just, it's clear that law was written in a way designed to minimize the amount of cell coverage. And it seems outdated.
I agree in kind of the content of it, like, I don't have an issue with that. I have not, given that it was presented to us for the first time, I haven't gone in depth and thought
No.
about what the impact could be. Are there unintended consequences? Have we thought about, is there a better way to do this? Like, that type of thing. So my instinct is that, well, yes, I agree, cell coverage is a problem in town. I would be opposed to it just because I don't have kind of the full breadth of understanding of impact and consequence and
Yeah.
all the rest.
If I had to decide today, I would think the same, and I also found the presentation to be rather hard to follow.
Should we extend an invitation to the presenter to come to the planning board, just
To attempt
so
to
that we
Sure.
give them
Yeah.
the opportunity to
address
answer
questions or, yeah.
questions?
That would give us more of an opportunity.
So we can come to understand exactly what it's
What-
all about.
yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
If they want us to endorse it, it's up to them.
And so, and I do know, your first meeting in June after town meeting is when you will begin to start your goals and objectives conversation. And one of those, in talking with the chair of the select board is for the board to look at in general, updating the wireless bylaw because it is woefully inconsistent with federal law and the courts.
Yeah.
Minor problem.
And, working with town council to
Yeah.
overhaul
Mhm.
that bylaw.
Yeah.
So that, that may also factor into
A decision about,
a decision, if you're going to commit to overhauling the bylaw, changing one section. Whether is that,
as opposed to engaging in like a robust public process by which
About the
we,
whole thing.
about the whole
Right.
thing. Yeah, yeah. So let's invite him to the
Yeah.
meeting
Yeah.
and then we'll address,
invite him,
yeah.
to either next Tuesday or the 29th. 29th may be busy.
Town meeting seems so far away.
It's not.
Ah, there's a-
The days and calendar are closer than they appear.
Other years we might have been done with it.
I know. We'd be
I was
setting
thinking
our
that.
goals.
42 is the signed by law amendment, which that will also be consent agenda. The accessory retail. There weren't any questions or concerns raised with that. I think the town moderator may also consider putting that on the consent agenda, that just for the board's understanding, that was the town meeting study committee. Did look at trying using the consent agenda more heavily since anybody can pull an item off the
Off
consent
the-
agenda if need be, so. And then the commercial parking. Were a few questions. I know the EVC is meeting to discuss this. One item that I do know that the EVC is looking at, one of the issues raised was clarifying. Currently, the bylaw does not have any language in there about an increase in square footage. So I do know that they are going to look to put that language into the bylaw. There were into the motion, yes. There bylaw amendments, as you know, there's numerous drafts. It was in the very earliest draft, and then for, I don't know why it got taken out, and, so I'm going to meet with the chair to figure out how best to put that in, because it's not, I think the earliest draft had a change in square footage of the building, but it's really not a change in square footage of the building. It could be just a change in the square footage of the use, or the tenant space. So I need to sit down with him and kind of think through, the questions that were raised at the public hearing. And similar to the joint parking, we have a change in use and or tenant. So it may be an increase in square footage of the tenant lease space.
Yeah,
But we'll figure that out and then get feedback from town council.
so do we want to table that discussion until that happens? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, great.
I did notice we got several questions from the public at the public hearing about possible interaction between two articles. And what if something changed under one article to allow a change in use, but then it would allow you to change I'm sorry, I've forgotten, it was long enough ago and I'm getting very confused. But I was thinking about, it's not actually an issue because a different section of the zoning bylaw that is not affected by the change we're making prevents the problem that people were worried about. But that's not obvious from the way it's written. And also, what if that other part of the zoning bylaw were to change? Should we pin it down more in whichever of these two articles, in one of these two articles, to make sure that they couldn't interact, allowing people to get the benefit of both articles in ways that they can't actually? I'm saying this really badly.
No, but I
No,
think,
it
I
wasn't-
think
it
it,
wasn't
I think it raises the point that that was a consistent concern. It was confusing to the
Yeah.
public and we need to have a slide or something that answers that question. Like, this is how different sections interact. This is why we're not concerned about that or concerned about it. This is how we've addressed it. Just, we need a better explanation
Right.
because once we were 5 or 6 questions into it, it's like, okay, this is getting confusing
Yeah.
for
Right.
everybody. And
Yeah.
that type of confusion can sow dissent because
Right.
it just, if we're unclear on it, then we'd rather say no than say
Mhm.
yes to something we don't fully understand.
Right, and as you can tell from the way I just struggled through that before, I'm muddled about it now. What I can't remember is, was it a matter of we need to be clear about this in the presentation? Or would it even be worth in one of the articles inserting a cross-reference to the controlling language that prevents the problematical thing?
You might want
You know,
I don't-
I'm not sure.
I think again, what I saw,
During the presentation.
and other people may have seen something different, is once you started talking about changing parking requirements, it went to the global
Mhm.
problem of parking is an issue, which I'll admit, I can't park where I want, so it's a problem, but it became a global, and anytime there's a change here, did you think about these 5 things? Because it'll impact down the road, and the answer, we tried to keep it contained and said, look, this is the problem we're trying to deal with. But in people's head, it's all related.
Right.
And I don't know how to get out in front of that, honestly, but that was a pure example of people did a really good job trying to dig deep into the code to try to figure out how these pieces which don't mesh together.
They don't, they're separate entities.
And then got themselves confused, because I was looking at it during the meeting and saying, okay, this says this says this, and then I realized, like, you actually have to take a step back and they don't relate at all. And other than blankly saying that, I don't know how to
No,
put it in
but we have to
presentation.
put it up there and clarify
Yes.
it to people. We can't just say, well, it
Sorry,
doesn't,
Mark.
yeah,
No, it's okay. No,
yeah.
No, but because it's,
I question whether we even pursue it. You know, I mean,
That's why
so-
we have hearings. just
Yeah.
Before the town meeting.
Even pursue what? When you said question, even pursuing it.
warrant article 37.
Oh,
Yeah.
37.
We talked about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
but 37 is such a good idea.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting we even consider that.
but I mean, but if you did take the public comments, they were 90% negative, because that's just the nature of what that meeting was, and I don't think that reflects. When I talk with people outside of that setting and explain what it means, people understand, but I think if they were in that meeting, they would have gotten confused too, and started to, because it's hard.
Yeah, I just really think that what people need we need to have some way of explaining to people that the guardrails are there, that the
Mhm.
bylaws are designed in such a way that X cannot undo Y and Y cannot undo X, but we have to be able to explain that.
Mhm.
Briefly. And I don't know, Elizabeth, you have more experience with this.
I can adequately explain 37.
Well, 44, you said there's still a whole bunch of outstanding questions that they have to work out at this point, but.
Yeah, I think 44 is the more challenging
Challenging, yeah,
one to explain.
Yeah.
And
But that's not our problem.
Yeah, this is pulling the pin and walking away, it's not.
You know, it's the citizens petitions. I mean, it's really difficult for us to figure out zoning, and we've spent a whole year on it, and then people come in and decide they're gonna redo cell towers, and they're gonna redo parking, and they're gonna zone,
Create a new type of zoning.
create a continuing, a new kind of zoning overlay district that we've never heard of. And I think, it's interesting. I mean, nobody goes to the finance committee and decides they want to change, that they're gonna put something and change the budget, that they're gonna.
Just wait for him to get this here.
Just wait, oh, yeah.
I've seen.
You've seen
You've
it's
seen it.
coming, and so I think maybe we need a school for, for,
so,
Ambitious zoning.
again, I
but how,
I feel like it's kind of punting something down
Yeah.
the road again, but I kind of think the board needs to have a conversation with the EVC
Mhm. Agreed.
about the two. And so again, I can see if Mike
Invite
Watson
them
is
to-
available for next
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he can, come to a meeting and, the planning board can have a conversation, with
Yeah.
him about that specific, those specific issues that were
Yeah,
raised. at the
that would
public
be, that would be
hearing.
helpful.
And how, whether both articles move forward, or only one article moves forward, or whether they both don't move forward. I think that can be a conversation as well.
Okay,
Good idea.
45.
There was,
The PRD amendment.
there was only one question, as far as I saw, and it was whether it applied to MCI. I mean, it was
Right.
basically very simple and straightforward.
Yeah.
It. The PRD bylaw is only for the residential districts.
Mhm.
Who's to say what new zoning is gonna be established for MCI Concord?
Mhm.
I imagine it's probably it may be one or more type
Mhm.
of districts.
Yeah.
Whether there's going to be purely a residential district, I don't know. But,
Yeah.
I don't imagine it's going to be, but, even if there is a residential, purely just a residential district on a portion of MCI Concord, if the PRD bylaw is not a good fit, then we would be looking at an amendment to the PRD bylaw that excludes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
excludes the new MCI district, but, at this point, I don't
Premature,
envision,
yeah.
I don't envision that.
Great.
And then we've already discussed.
We already discussed, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything with that. Next item is the MCI Advisory Board input request. So we received a letter from the MCI Advisory Board asking our requesting input. What do we see as the best future of the site? I mean, yeah, for redevelopment, yeah.
So,
I don't know why we're.
so
Because they're trying to
the,
get input from people, you know.
Yeah, I
Well,
get it.
was it the planning board as a whole or from the individual?
That's a
I
pretty
don't know,
heavy
it's
ask
just-
for the planning board. I mean,
Excuse me.
Mhm.
We didn't tackle, warrant item number 46. You went on to the next agenda item and you didn't finish 46.
Oh, we took it up earlier directly after 37.
Just noting that we weren't having any discussion on that tonight. because
Until,
there-
until the select board, they're working with the select board, so we're gonna wait until the select board finishes their process and comes back to us.
And then you said, unless unless you want to talk specifically about the article for zoning, and then you.
Oh, we said that
forward.
there's no need to discuss specifics about the zoning because, or at least that was our intent, because there was. Most of the public comment at our hearing was related to specific concerns about the project. And we could determine whether we could support or not the citizens petition based on what the actual agreement between the town and the deaconess, whatever that actually outlined as specific restrictions. So it's sort of like we don't have enough information to have any sort of discussion.
Well,
And
I've
we're-
got some information and you're not allowing it, I think a number of us.
I'm really confused by that statement. So you're saying that you guys are not involved, it's being sorted out between the selectmen and deaconess?
No, we're saying that we would like to take it up in our meeting on the 29th after the select board and deaconess have talked about the
memorandum.
agreement, because how can we comment on the zoning article before then?
I don't understand what agreement. is
So at the-
happening on 29th?
If you remember at our hearing, the public hearing that we had, there was a suggestion that a lot of the concerns that individuals had maybe could possibly be addressed through what at that time was referred to as a development agreement, which now the select board has said would be like a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding. So it's this parallel process that's running where they're trying to work out some of those concerns with the select board. And the reason it's with the select board is that that memorandum of agreement or understanding would be between them and the select board, not us.
So
it's a-
how does the public
So
get
how,
involved?
yeah, how does the neighborhood get any
How do we have
information?
input?
So that's, should be on the select board agenda, correct?
That's on the select board's agenda for May 12th.
And then our thought was then have them come back here, and that will be on our agendas. So
On the
that then with
29th.
all of the information on the 29th, then we can have this robust discussion, because we'll have all of the information as opposed to, do we engage in a discussion now, and then it turns out, oh, they've made some alterations or changes. And this is the difficult thing about the warrants for town meeting, is that there can be motions and amendments leading up to it, and some of that gets worked out in advance, like we're saying, oh, we want to change this one word because we think it'll make it clear. That process happens leading up to town meeting, and that's why we have a meeting next week and a meeting on the 29th, because this
And-
process is still
and one
evolving.
thing I'll just also note, sorry, this one's a citizens petition, which means they're the ones writing it, and we're just saying. We're literally like, you know how they always read out, like. This is one of those ones where we will determine whether the planning board recommends affirmative action or does not recommend affirmative action. So we don't have any control over the specifics of what's in that, the setbacks and the height,
Right,
all
because
that
it's a
stuff.
petition
That's
from- they knew
all-
what they were doing, yes, that's
Exactly,
what
so it's our discussion is very focused, it's not necessarily gonna be, that's why we're waiting for. All the information before we can recommend or not affirmative action, so sorry, I
We should have
interrupted
told you
you.
an hour ago, we apologize,
Sorry.
you've been watching
Well, you
us.
kind
So-
of did, and now we're saying, well, what about
Okay, so
that?
I'm gonna take,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take back control. If you would like to have public comment, you need to state your name and your address. so that Heather doesn't kill me when she decides to do the minutes. So if you like, with the understanding that, and I think, that Wendy Rivoli had her hand up and she put it down, so I don't know if she wants to make a statement or not. But then if the board wants to take some, public comment with the understanding that the board cannot answer questions about the project itself. They can't answer questions about the height. They can't answer questions about, tree removal. They can't answer questions about, the architecture, those may be things that the select board will discuss through this, memorandum of agreement, more specifics, things that are not appropriate to be in zoning. If there's specific questions about the citizens petition and the zoning, again, not even sure the planning board can answer those questions because it is a citizens petition. I think, if you let, your select board liaison have a comment, and then you can open it up at that point.
Sure, I just wanted to, I just want to comment that, yes, we are starting some discussions. There is no definitive plan. We have invited Deaconess to come to the select board on the 12th. Our intention is also to make sure, just as Elizabeth said, that stuff that is zoning is in the zoning, right? And that anything that's not appropriate to be in zoning might be in a memorandum of understanding with the select board. And those are things that are that wouldn't be appropriate to be in sort of a site plan review. And they're addressing some of the citizen concerns, but I would just suggest that the meeting on the 12th might be the place to hear more about that agreement and not here. But if there are comments about the zoning issues, and I think there's been an offer to share some zoning details back to New England Deaconess, they are actually going to take in some of that input, and I believe they may have to make some changes to the zoning as well. So send feedback to them, and then also attend the select board if you feel necessary, but watch the agenda on the 12th. It's not confirmed that they're going to be ready to meet there on the 12th, but that's our plan.
And then I will also add, because this is a citizen's petition, you can reach out directly to the petitioners, with questions,
We've tried.
comments.
They're not interested.
Wait, state your name.
Yeah,
thank you.
So, then you can forward them to me, and I will forward them on your behalf. Not sure, or there may be questions that I can answer on a higher level of just zoning and how zoning works. I'd be more than happy to even try and answer those questions. So if you do have specific questions, I might not be able to answer them again because it's a citizen's petition, but from a zoning perspective and how zoning works and how zoning gets structured, or how it, as I mentioned at the public hearing, how one section of zoning bylaw, there's many sections, and how they work together, and some of them, they don't work together. They don't have any correlation. Those are questions that I'd be more than happy to answer. So
Can I ask a question?
you definitely, you always can ask a question.
Because I am new to this, and am I correct in understanding? I've never done an overlay district before, but if the petition is about creating an overlay district, that would be about creating a district that would have its own rules and regulations as a continuing care district. It has really nothing to do with who builds there or what they build, other than in that bylaw, you might have some specificity about what can be built there.
The parameters, the initial parameters of how that use would fit to that site. So it only gives you the initial parameters, no different than any other, residence AA. You have to have 80,000 square feet of area. You have to have 200 feet of frontage. It doesn't say, you know, your maximum height is 35 feet. Doesn't say it could be, you know, it could be a modern architecture, you know, house, it could be a Tudor mansion, it could, but so the zoning only lists, you know, the parameters for a project. It doesn't provide the specificity of design, layout, materials, amenities. Those are, you know, traffic patterns, parking. It can tell you how much parking you have to have, but it's not gonna tell you where it has to be
Where it has to be.
located. There are some bylaws where it tells you where, you know, it can't be located. In some parts, you know, you can't have parking within a certain setback or, those are all things that happen during, you know, site plan review, and the public hearing process when, you know, somebody goes through, you know, once zoning is in place, you know, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for a project like this to get to the specificity of site plan review. The
Right,
drainage, the traffic impacts,
what it
and
might
all of
look
that.
like to the
Mhm.
neighbors,
What it-
how it might feel to the neighbors.
yes.
However,
So-
some of those things could be in
Let
the
me,
memorandum.
let me finish this before I forget it. But so for the frustration of I feel the frustration of the neighbors. And, is there a way for the neighbors to, or anyone interested in this, to really understand, is there a snapshot of what it is? You know, there are things we can't answer questions to, or we can't address, but what you can within the scope of a zoning bylaw. But you just said it,
Yeah,
but it's a
but I
lot.
mean, but it's just the language. I mean, if you look at the petitioner's bylaw, it says these are the setbacks. You know, these are the, you know, the height. This is the amount of open space. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't specifically state where that open space has to be, but, you know, it has to have this amount of open space. You know, they talked about the attainable units. It's, so it says here's the parameters, you know, here's the size of the box and here's the requirements that you have to fit within this box, but we're not gonna tell you, you know, how you fit into the box. A lot of the issues and concerns are ones that, such as, yes, you know, the setback in the bylaw says this, and you can go to this height, but there's issues and concerns with, you know, the old Marlboro side and, so in the memorandum of agreement, there may be a higher level of that, and to use the word again, that specificity of addressing that issue and concern through a memorandum of agreement.
But that goes to somebody who's planning to do that building would have a memorandum of agreement with the town.
Right, so that,
versus
that
the
memorandum
zoning
of,
bylaw.
right, that memorandum of agreement gets formally executed between, you know, the property owner and the select board. And it gets recorded.
Travels with the wind.
Right, I understand all that. It's just that there's a separation. There's a separation between the memorandum of agreement and the town deciding they want to create an overlay district.
Right, but
there-
we could refuse to create the overlay district unless we are content with the memorandum of understanding
Correct.
that irrevocably goes with the property covered by the overlay district, or we could pass it without the agreement.
Oh,
So if they determine that, look, the select board can't agree with whatever's going on, they don't like it. They would get up in front of town meeting and say, you should vote against this. Then we would say, hey, they didn't give us any information about what it is, we're not comfortable, we think you should vote against it, and then it would be up to town meeting to determine. You know, that's gonna be a lot harder discussion for them to have if they don't have. The committee that's responsible for zoning and the committee that's responsible for the management of the town, they're both saying no. It's gonna stay single family, I mean, that's what you run into, is you have to play ball. And they acknowledge that in the hearing, saying a lot of your concerns can be addressed with this MOU. We should get in discussions and make one.
But there isn't any developer that's gonna go through the hundreds of thousands of dollars to design this project before
Right.
the zoning, you know,
And there's
the
no-
zoning doesn't get passed.
And there's no,
But-
and there's no
but they
buyer.
They
who's
can
gonna-
enter into a memorandum of agreement and saying, yes, you know what, the zoning says, can go to 80 feet. And the memorandum of agreement says, it's only gonna be located in this spot on the lot.
Okay,
Even though the setbacks are, 40 feet from the front. And, which something else, it wasn't stated at the hearing. This is a corner lot. So that 40 feet goes all the way around Old Marlboro and Ornack. So it only has a front and two sides. But the taller portion of the building, they, as part of the the memorandum of agreement, they say, okay, well, we're gonna contain it, 40 feet on this side, 70 feet on this side, 30 something feet from, that property line. So they can be more specific, but not have to, go through and hire an architect to completely design,
mhm,
what it's gonna look like.
mhm.
I wasn't sure, as part of your question, you said several times overlay district. Are you clear about the difference, how an overlay district works? That the underlying zoning of residence AA will still pertain except where explicitly overridden, although the zoning article proposed overlay overrides an awful lot
Yeah,
of the underlying. Okay, just
Yeah.
making sure.
So if the overlay district, it's no different than the MBTA communities, which is an overlay district. Part of that is, across the street, Concord Market. Could be MBTO, but the underlying zoning of business is still there. So the underlying zoning of residence AA is still gonna be there. Somebody could, decide, you know what? We're just gonna build 7 new single-family dwellings by right. That's the underlying zoning. And that's what we're gonna do. So the underlying zoning is still there. It's still an option.
okay, I think I've got it, and next year I'll definitely have it. Yeah, thank you, that's very helpful, I appreciate your
You want to take
patience.
comment now?
Okay, I guess, we'll open it back up to, public questions. I interrupted you, sorry, about 10 minutes ago.
Jim Boucher, 80 Old Marlboro Road. A clarifying question about the memorandum of agreement. It doesn't seem like, there are a number of us that are abutters. We don't seem to have a channel to agree to anything. I don't see how our interests are represented in the memorandum of agreement. Could you talk about like, how is that binding or
That
who are
would be
the
a-
parties
That would
to
be a
it?
question for the
I-
select board during their public hearing.
Yeah,
As the parties.
I would recommend, that questions and comments, specifically, can be, forwarded to, the select board. Procedurally, that memorandum of agreement gets executed between, the property owner, and the select board. And it gets recorded with the registry of deeds. It becomes, a binding document that these parameters of the zoning bylaw, should they be implemented, will incorporate these items that are listed in the memorandum of agreement. So should the property be sold, those items that need to be incorporated basically run with the land and run with the zoning.
That all makes sense like after it's completed, but
No,
It
no,
doesn't
the
exist
agreement,
yet?
the agreement would be executed before town meeting.
Oh, but
So-
if you
But
want
what I'm
to
trying to
affect the
say is-
agreement, you should talk to the select board
Right.
either at their meeting or by contacting them in advance of
So
that.
we should contact the select Jennifer Hurley Wales, 66 Old Marlboro Road. Just to make sure it's crystal clear, our opportunity to have our voice heard for this memo of understanding is to go to the select board and be heard there, or to write the select board.
I would write in advance,
Right in
Of the
advance.
12th.
Okay,
and then, attend on the 12th.
okay.
Yeah, Yes.
Can I just ask one other, I know there's a warrant review session on Friday morning with the League of Women Voters. And this is on the agenda.
I wouldn't know
Okay,
anything
yeah.
about that.
So if you all haven't responded yet, is it,
I would hope that the content of that meeting would be, well, we don't know yet.
okay.
We'll let you know.
We'll all be there, yeah.
Okay, in the back, you had your hand up first. Larry.
Yeah, Stu Cruzel, 60 Emerson Road. I'm getting what you're saying, but I'm also a little concerned or a question from the earlier timeline, and I'm newer than some of you. So the meeting's supposed to be on the 12th, but they may or may not be ready, according to Wendy. Which means you may or may not have that for your meeting on the 29th. And we're coming up against the warrant on the 17th. And some of your discussion was
No,
things
is
can
that
happen.
what's the
June
17th?
Not the town meeting.
Is June 2nd?
Second, sorry, so even better. So we're on a very compressed timeline.
Yes.
But we don't really know. So this literally can move to the night of the warrant.
The night of
The
town meeting.
selectmen saying that they
Yes.
agree with it and you deciding whatever.
Yes.
And how would we know that?
The planning board would have to post 48 hours in advance an agenda to post a meeting for them to have a conversation. Should they need to have a conversation an hour or half an hour before town meeting.
And then we would have the ability to comment to
Yeah.
you about that.
Yeah,
And also the planning board would state clearly its recommendation for or against on the floor of town meeting if we hadn't made a decision before then.
It says, one of the comments before is, an agreement has been reached with the golf course, yet somehow nobody wants to talk to us. And that's your comment about frustration, that's the frustration. Now it's like, we'll go to the selectmen's meeting, maybe on the 12th, maybe not on the 12th, maybe an hour before it gets voted on.
No,
That's
so
rather
the-
hard when we want to be able to look out on a tree, as was stated earlier, on Old Marlboro.
so the comment made by Wendy Rivoli is the select board will be meeting with the petitioner at their meeting on the 12th. The select board may not be in a position to formally vote their recommendation to town meeting. The select board makes a recommendation to town meeting on every single article. The planning board luckily only has to do that on zoning articles. So her comment was after their meeting on the 12th, they may not be in a position to make a vote on the 12th regarding that article. They may continue it to, I'm pretty sure, from March 12th, they meet probably every Monday, up to June 2nd. So they may, again, continue their conversation to formally make their recommendation, their vote to town meeting after the 12th. It was her comment, and Wendy can jump in if I got that wrong, but that's, and while traditionally or procedurally, the planning board, I don't think, at least in the past 4 years, has had to meet the night of town meeting to vote their recommendation. And I think the last time it happened might have also been a citizen's petition. Because once again, they're basically not in control of the process. So a citizen's petition, they could be, proposing amendments in their motion all the way up to the minute before the article comes up on the floor of town meeting. So that's why you also see at town meeting, there is state, basically state law that allows the planning board to formally meet as a board and make decisions during town meeting, because if somebody gets up and makes an amendment to a zoning article on the floor of town meeting, the planning board needs to be able to discuss that. And again, make their recommendation to town meeting. So that's why citizens petitions are, always the most challenging, not only for the board, but for citizens, because things can change.
Can I just ask a point of clarification on that is, somebody puts an amendment, you have the right to meet. What's our right to have input into your decision?
You do not have the right to input into the board's decision. The board is legally required under the State Zoning Act as a board to form an opinion as a 7-member board to make a recommendation to town meeting. That is their legal obligation. There's no legal obligation that they, during every deliberation, they have to take public comment. The legal requirement, that's the public hearing. That's why, at the public hearing, State Zoning Act specifically says the planning board shall hold a public hearing on all zoning bylaw amendments. That's where they get public input. This board typically, even after the public hearing, has had conversations about their presentation and provided answers to clarify things. But ultimately, when this board votes to make their recommendation to town meeting, it's as seven individual members as a board voting their recommendation. It could be all 7 agree, it could be 4-3, it could be, that.
With no ability for us to have any input in that.
As a voter, you have the ability.
Your
to-
input is as town meeting, as a voter, you ultimately are the ones to decide. The planning board's only making a recommendation.
And we also need to remind they also will have the opportunity to speak at town meeting as well to counter these proposals, this petition.
Right, so if they make an amendment in the middle of town meeting, we go off and talk about it, but the citizens have the opportunity to then comment on that amendment or to vote that amendment for or against. So that's where it happens for citizens who are not on boards.
Sorry, you had it.
Go ahead.
Mark Stackness, 34 Old Marlborough Road. I really wanted to talk about the article, not about what they're gonna build there. And I've just heard that the planning board, zoning board will make their decision. And I heard you earlier.
The planning board will make their recommendation.
Say that, sorry,
No worries.
you interrupted me and I can't remember. So I've heard a number of things. One, the article is a citizen's petition, you can't change it. If there's one single thing in it you don't like, will you recommend against it? Or because there's nothing you can do, either you can be yay or nay. Just from a realistic perspective, if you and the select board both say we recommend this, I'm pretty sure it's gonna pass at town meeting, no matter what I say. So seems like a new kind of zoning. And you're the guys who can make a new kind of zoning and present it at town meeting. Seems like a lot of thought should go into that. But when I read the article, it seems like it's all over the place and full of inconsistencies. Let me give you one example. It says that per acre, there can be 16 dwellings for independent living. Now, I don't know what that means. Can there be multiple apartments in it? Is that a dwelling? Can there be only 4 dwellings in a building? And so there can be 4 buildings, because that's 16. A big thing with me is what they call it's not the right terminology, multi-occupancy building, which can be 85 feet tall and has 40-foot setback requirements. Now, I didn't read all of the zoning, but it seems that if you want to have something that's that tall, it has to be set back pretty far. And in fact, in the zoning requirements, there's something very specific about this. I think it's Emerson Hospital has to be set back this far to be that high, but this thing that the voters are going to potentially vote on, and you might recommend, says that they can put an 85-foot structure, multi-unit, within 40 feet, a 40 feet setback. Ironically, it says there can be 16 independent living units on an acre. I try to figure that out. That looks pretty crowded to me. But it doesn't say how many of these 85-foot structures there can be. Can they put 2 an acre? Can they put them right next to the road? It is an overlay. Are you opening up a can of worms for yourself where someone is gonna come to the planning board and say, we've got the zoning for this and we have an acre of land and we're gonna put this enormous structure right next to Main Street and the voters have voted for it. And then you'll say, well, that's part of, it just seems full of so many generalities, not specific to Deaconess and what they plan to do across the street from me. That I just don't understand how something can be proposed that you guys have not looked over with the fine tooth comb to see if it's gonna make sense in the future for others, right? That's my concern. Now, you also say that we shouldn't talk about this now because they're gonna meet with the selectmen in the middle. So are the selectmen specifically in the middle of May going to look at this as zoning? Or are they going to look at it as, oh yeah, it's zoning plus it's Deaconess and then there's the homeowners and they don't want stuff right up against. I don't know, why would the select board be looking at the zoning requirements and not you guys in advance of this select? I'm, I haven't been to a lot of these meetings. I'm really sorry. I don't know how it works, but I'm not getting a lot of clarity in my concerns about the article itself. I haven't mentioned anything else.
So the concerns about the article itself can and should be presented to the petitioner, the one who actually wrote, because it's a citizen's petition. We don't have the answers. And that's partially why we're delaying any discussion we have until we have the citizen's petition, the final article as they plan to present at town meeting and any memorandum of understanding. And then at that point, we can make a decision of whether we support it or not. But we don't have any clarity on the things you named because those are things that would be addressed within the MOU.
Well, that's not entirely so, because as Elizabeth said, she can answer some of your questions about zoning. For example, there's a specific definition in the zoning bylaw of what a dwelling unit is. And that clarifies what it means to say there's a maximum of 16 dwellings per acre. That refers, it doesn't specify what they're in. You could put 60 dwellings stacked on top of each other and nothing else on your acre, or you could put 16 dwellings all spread out 1 story high in a single joint building, or you could have 16 individual ones. Any of those alternatives would be 16 units per acre, and they can't go above that according to what they have proposed.
So how is it that you can stack one on top of the other, but each dwelling, according to the article, has a 40-foot and 30-foot and 15-foot setback?
Well,
How
would
does
be a
that even make sense?
Question
That's what
for
it
the
says.
petitioner. But then another thing, I think you mentioned Main Street. There is a zoning map that was proposed along with the overlay that says it only applies to that one property across from Emerson. So it couldn't be used elsewhere in town.
This is not a general thing.
No, it's only those 7 lots that Deaconess bought from Emerson Hospital.
It's just pertains to that parcel.
That 12 acres, yes.
And another thing,
Only.
Another
So
thing,
no one else when we vote on a town meeting, no one else can say, hey, I'm gonna do this same overlay.
well,
Correct.
somebody
Nowhere,
could
nowhere
propose an
else in
amendment.
town. It's
Great.
only those
Excellent.
12 acres.
Unless somebody
Thank you.
proposes an amendment to add something else, but then you would have the
So-
opportunity to
So
vote
let
that
me,
down.
so wait, let me
That would
stop,
be
let me
okay.
stop right there.
Okay.
Let me stop right there. This article is only for those 12 acres.
Yeah.
Nobody could, on the floor
Oh,
of
you're
town
right, that would be
meeting,
out of scope.
can expand that overlay district to include anything else in town. That is not allowed. It is, beyond the scope of the article. It increases, you can reduce the scope of an article. You cannot increase the scope of the article. So let me be very clear. Nobody can on the floor of town meeting say, well, we want to expand the overlay district to include all of the Concord Country Club. That is not permissible.
Apologies, I misspoke there.
So I want to be very clear.
How did you misspeak? I thought I understood.
I misspoke by saying somebody could expand it on the floor of town meeting.
Oh.
They could not expand it on the
Yeah,
floor of town meeting.
But it still
could
applies
expand it a
only to
different
that
year.
parcel.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
to those
Only that
12
one.
acres. It's actually made up, I think, of currently seven individual
I
parcels, but
walked over there.
And you also asked about, well, the setbacks of 40 feet and you wouldn't want a building that close to Old Marlboro. But one of the things that could or might not be addressed in the memo of understanding is to say, well, the setback on Old Marlboro would be what it says in the, would be one thing, whereas the setback on, across from Emerson Hospital could be smaller because maybe people wouldn't mind having a building closer across from Emerson Hospital compared to across from residences. But that is not part of zoning. That would have to be addressed in the memo of agreement, if at all.
So one final question. So you said before we could ask you this, so I'm gonna ask you this. What will come into your consideration of whether let's say the article doesn't change, what will come into your consideration of whether to favor or oppose this at town meeting?
Well, I've been thinking about it and I have not fully evaluated the language of this article, but it does seem rather unconstrained. And I am really hoping that there will be a memo of agreement that will constrain it to something clearer. And I haven't seen it. I can't see more than that right now.
But it is the role of the planning board to consider things in terms of the zoning bylaws and the benefit to the community. Help me out with this, guys. There's
Right.
there's like a 5-point
Public interest.
public
Yeah.
interest.
All of the above, yeah.
Yeah, but I've been thinking about some of the things that could theoretically be built strictly under the zoning as proposed, and some of those maybe aren't in the public interest.
Right, well,
But
that's what our.
this is a moving
Our
target
intended
right
Yeah,
now.
that's the hard part. We have a moving target right now, so we're waiting for the target to stop before we start having that discussion.
And we haven't decided what we're going to say yet.
We don't have enough.
Yeah, we haven't decided. We're still in a process that you can come to every one of our
I mean-
meetings and watch.
I mean, just from a sheer volume of discussion and concerns and all of that stuff, where we're discussing not moving forward with our parking amendment because of how negative it was at town meeting or at our public hearing. The comments at the hearing for this were much more negative. So the petitioner would really have to explain that away for me to understand why, like, to get a sense of whether this is good or bad. Again, we don't know what it looks like yet because it's still being refined. And there's a huge piece of it still out there that we can't comment on, so I don't know.
I'm not gonna beat a dead horse, I promise.
Name and address.
Oh, Mike, it's Jim Jackson, 44 Old Marlboro Road.
Dead horse owner.
Right. So one question I have is, because this is very specific zoning that doesn't have anything else in the town like it, why is it not considered spot zoning, which is not really legal to go forward?
Because it is, it is of an acreage size, so two reasons. One, it's an overlay district. It is, there's still the underlined by right zoning. This is an overlay district that a property owner can choose to do or not, is one reason. Additionally, through the courts, spot zoning, 12 acres is, that's a fairly reasonable sized piece of property. Would be
Depends what
the,
you're gonna put on it.
would be the other, well, so that comes down to, so zoning gives you the framework. And again, it does not tell you, what the buildings are gonna look like, where's the parking gonna be. All the parking may be under the building and, the rest of the, there may be very limited surface parking. So, the zoning doesn't tell you, all of those parameters. So, from your spot zoning question, 12 acres is of a sufficient enough size that it's, I do not believe that the Attorney General or the courts would find that spot zoning.
Okay.
I can give you the perfect example of spot zoning. The town has 8 of them. It is called the Limited Business District. This was before spot zoning was actually became a term. 59 Walden Street has its own specific zoning. That would be spot zoning. The Boathouse has its own specific zoning. That would be spot zoning when you're talking about something of such a limited scope.
So one other, just a point of reference, is septic design part of zoning?
No.
No, okay, because
Nope.
they're asking for a septic system that will have a capacity of 360 people, not 200. So my last question, and I promise to be quiet, is.
So let me answer your question. There are certain state laws that are very specific unto themselves, and no other law that or a bylaw or a regulation that a town adopts legally can influence, change, or modify. Title V, which is your septic laws,
Exactly what I'm talking about.
your building codes. There's, and, your fire codes. So there's certain things that, a community cannot say, well, we don't want to abide by that state law. We're gonna implement our own requirements. So Title V is one of those. And under Title V, there's 2 types of systems. There's the smaller systems that are governed by our health division and the Board of Health. And then there's larger systems where the state says, no, those are going to be, the jurisdiction is under the Department of Environmental Protection. So for this project, that would be, it's called a groundwater discharge permit. It's actually under Title V. It's a specific process they have to go through with DEP for that on-site sewage disposal system. There's quite a few in Concord.
Right, but the state is 110 gallons per person.
So Title V has 100 and it's not per person. It's 110 gallons per day per bedroom for a residential single-family dwelling. A nursing home has a different calculation. A hospital has a different calculation. A business has a different there's tables in Title V of what that requirement is. So they will be required to meet whatever the requirement is in Title V through their DEP permit.
So if it takes a 2/3 vote to change the zoning, if they need to make amendments to the zoning because they get through the design process and they say, oh, it's not financially feasible to do this, but we've got the zoning changed, and, we want to make this change or that change, what's the process after they already have gotten that zoning secured?
Now, if there is something that needs to be changed in zoning, they go back to town meeting. Only town meeting can change zoning.
But how about memorandum or whatever you said,
So the memorandum of
Doesn't change the
agreement that
Yeah.
they're executing, if there's something in there, they would have to go back to the select board.
the select board, but not the town meeting?
Not for the memorandum of agreement, no.
That's separate from the zoning.
That's
And the,
separate.
and the memorandum of agreement wouldn't require 2/3 votes of anything, it would just be the select board saying, you can make that change, you can double the number of people on the property.
No, because the zoning is going to limit the number of dwelling units. It's gonna limit the number of units, and that, the number of units is going to be
So
a
that's
factor
fine.
of people.
Okay.
But that is binding under the zoning. The
So they
zoning
couldn't
is
change that,
not unless they go back to town meeting.
got it.
Yeah.
The select board could decide to change the setbacks that were agreed upon if there was anything along those lines, or the building heights that were agreed upon if that was in the agreement.
But it can
Well,
only be more
they-
restrictive.
So they would not be able to change the building heights to anything taller than what's in the zoning.
Correct.
Whatever's in the
I
zoning,
meant if they said it could be this tall here, they could change it to say it could be this tall here, but not higher than the allowed amount.
Right,
Just the
so there's a
location.
memorandum of agreement that says the building's gotta be 300 feet from Old Marlborough Road, and the builder finds that that's a problem. And the selectman goes, okay, you can move it to 40 feet, there's nothing we can do about it.
Complain to the select board. I mean, they work for you guys.
Okay. So it's really important to block this, the 2/3 vote, because we have no power, we got nothing, with no plan, there's nothing we can do.
Okay, we're gonna move on with the rest of our agenda. I hope I'll have a great moment.
Thank you.
Stick around.
That helped me a lot.
so, again, please, the procedural side of things and the zoning side of things, I'm more than happy to, and just to reiterate, the petitioner may come back and say, okay, we're gonna 40 feet on Old Marlborough and 40 feet from Ornac and 75 feet. We don't know what this final
Right.
zoning's gonna be.
But you can
So-
see our concern is that they're talking to the select board, the petitioner. They have an agreement with the Concord Country Club. They've had that out of the gate. Not one time have they ever contacted us.
And
I know you can't do anything about that, but that's our, like, that's why we're so.
no, I plan on sending an email. I know their counsel is smarter than that, so.
He told us we have 5 years. It's not gonna go through, so if we want to sell, don't worry, you've got 5 years, you can sell. He said it at that meeting that week, the public meeting.
And we have Carol Savoy online as a last comment related to this.
Yeah, hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap. I want to make a comment about Article 37, if you're still considering bringing that forward, that now that you've got mixed use involved, I guess you took out the word non-residential parking, which I went back and forth with Elizabeth, so mixed use is now allowed for off-site parking. So I think I was going to suggest you clarify that we now have residential units involved, not just commercial. So that you clarify that all residential units must have guaranteed overnight parking, because the way that it's written today, it doesn't explicitly require overnight parking for mixed use projects or joint use or offsite parking. So that can create a loophole where daytime uses are covered, like office and retail, or a bank or a bank to a restaurant. But overnight needs like apartments or residences or hotels, if they're included, do not have overnight parking. So what are those people going to do? So to plug the loophole before you put the article forward, if you choose to do so, I suggest that you put in some clarification language that all residential units have guaranteed overnight parking, and perhaps even ask them to, put together some sort of overnight operations plan about what they're gonna do for parking.
Excellent. So with that, we will move on to the MCI board input request, which, as a planning board, I didn't think really applied all that much to us generally, but thought I would open it up to everybody. As requested. I don't know. It's ask us the best future. What do we as the planning board? How do I phrase this? Best use or mixed use of the former MCI Concord property based on the mission and perspective of our group. And that's kind of.
I mean, I felt like this was just a generic request that would have gone to like.
It's
Concord
gone to
Colorado Youth
It's gone to
Baseball, or like, it's
everybody.
not to everybody,
Yeah.
so.
This is one of these things that I didn't
Yeah.
necessarily think it applied to as a group.
Well, I mean, I
Other
think
than-
there's an interesting conversation there. I think the issue is, I also kind of wonder, given that. We're gonna be responsible for the zoning for it, it's almost like we're the wrong end of that question and equation. If that makes sense to people.
Well, but doesn't it, I mean, the only thing I could think of was we have goals. You guys
Mhm.
have goals. You guys have a long range plan. You've got, so that, but it would have to be a discussion of what fits with
Yeah.
those.
It's more about
things.
making
It's
the,
not what we
the-
want.
if they say they want mixed use, it's more about our making sure the mixed use is the mixed use we actually want to see, not the mixed use we have.
What's in envision Concord? I mean,
Well, it is one of the town's goals to maintain a healthy mix of commercial versus residential versus other things, and zoning has some bearing on that. So in that sense, I feel it does apply to us, but it also seems like it's putting the cart before the horse to some degree.
So I'm gonna let Linda speak,
Mhm, sorry.
since she's a little bit more involved in this. but
Oh, that's right.
From my perspective,
Maybe
tomorrow is the town's consultant having, the visioning public forum. From 3 to 5, and then the other one's from
6
6
to
to
9.
9. So, I think there are generalities, no, what's generalities,
It's late.
in Envision Concord, for the vibrancy of the community, and I think, the planning board can easily make a statement that, Envision Concord lays out the values of the community. You can't say what should be there, because as it relates to Envision Concord, because it was always gonna be a prison. In 2016, 17, and 18, it would have been a completely different question if, conversation if we had known the prison was gonna be closing. So I think that that's what's happening right now, with, tomorrow's session. And then the last Wednesday in May will be here's what we heard, here are different scenarios. I think, at that point, there's going to be something more tangible for the board to say, yes or no. But other than making just a general statement of, whatever goes there should be built upon the goals and the values and the, I can't even remember the word that, the three big.
Goals, value, and mission.
No, there's the three, it's in the Envision Concord, it's the big ideas, it should be built upon, the big ideas as they're outlined in the Envision Concord plan, and the goals and values, for the community.
But that's kind of a non-statement
Mhm.
statement of. we
You can also
support
say, you know
this.
what, we didn't have enough time to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's enough.
adequately
that-
talk about this.
completely
and
valid.
Really want to hear what, you know, is said at the two.
Yeah,
public
really
forums.
interested to hear what the public has to say.
We
Yeah.
could say, we think we're the
And-
division of
and-
Concord.
And you don't have to say anything,
No.
actually. You're
Yeah.
not required to
Nope.
respond to this.
Yeah.
Can you shed light on why we were asked? Was there
they
something
asked everybody.
specific? Or was it
They're
because
trying to
you
get
asked everybody?
everybody's opinion.
I
They want
think-
everybody's opinion.
I
Right.
think they're trying to get everyone's opinion. I think the planning board are people, are considered to be people who are most thoughtful in ways about the land use possibilities in town. And so I mean, I see that, you know, that, again, they may have thought that, you know, there are multiple potential uses. Everybody, from wanting more soccer fields to wanting concert halls to, I mean, there are many, individual interests. There aren't a lot of committees that think about the town in generalities, in terms of what would be the priorities that this particular piece of land, given where it's situated near a train station, near major traffic patterns, I mean, you know, near a bike path. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that we might have unique thoughts or ideas that could be interesting and would be valuable to the consultants in the development process. So I you know, I don't undersell yourselves.
Well,
Is what I'm
I
saying.
have very strong opinions about what would be good for this land that is informed by my interest in planning and by my service on the planning board.
this
But I
is-
don't feel that it's my
Right.
opinion.
As
As a planning
That's-
board
that's
member,
kind of
that's kind of
my
the way I feel about, like,
opinion.
I will attend and as like taking off my planning board hat, and being
Yeah.
like, I'm a parent, I'm like, I have
Okay.
lots of thoughts.
Well, and
But as a
I-
planning board member, I'm kind of like, I actually need to be kind of more neutral in the beginning visioning process, because we're going to have to implement the vision of the town, and I don't want people to think, well, you know, she's got 3 kids who play sports, and she's just gonna zone it for like the sports fields. So I'm kind of almost like, I'm going to keep my cards close to the vest when wearing my planning board hat, because I need to be more neutral.
I wouldn't quite go that far in the sense that I plan to go and give my personal opinion and say, I am speaking for myself.
Yeah.
But informed by my
Right,
knowledge
totally,
as a
yeah.
planning board member, but I would be. Unless I get convinced otherwise, I would be speaking
Well,
for
then
myself.
maybe Elizabeth could put together 3 sentences that say, you know, the planning board is, happy, pleased that you included us in your outreach efforts. As a board, we have no general statements other than,
We look forward to the rezoning
Well,
later.
Well, I think.
you know,
other than they-
then Vision Concord.
Yeah.
Is, the master plan for the town, and
We look forward to
One,
engaging in
two-
like a
1,
robust
2,
public
3,
process.
yeah, 1, 2, 3 things, and,
being a part of the process.
Yeah.
and we look forward to being part of the,
Process.
ultimate zoning portion of the
Mhm.
process.
Yeah.
Later in the year. Yeah,
I'll,
and then.
I'll
Yeah, you
try and
should,
put something together and shoot it off to you.
yeah, it sounds good.
Okay,
That would be great.
tomorrow morning.
Yes.
You have a bed here.
That I was gonna say, tomorrow morning is getting closer.
Getting closer, yeah.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Yeah, I
And
don't
thank
think
you
I'm
for
gonna
reminding
get here at 6:30
everyone
tomorrow morning, like normal.
about the
Maybe
meetings
7.
tomorrow at Giroux Park and at, Harvey Wheeler.
Yes. So I will be attending, the 3 to 5 session.
What, you don't want another night meal?
No. You have no idea how happy I am that the zoning board of appeals is like done with comprehensive permits.
Oh.
So much work for you. That's a lot. Okay.
So that's that. The next thing we have is planning board liaison updates. The only thing I'll note is the next Concord Housing Roundtable is May 19th. Monday, 5 to 6:30. I believe they will notice it as one of our meetings, whether we attend or not. So you're welcome to attend if you would like, and if you are, it will be a meeting, and if not, it will not be. We have quorum. I think last time we didn't have quorum, so it doesn't matter, but
don't even know what's on the agenda, so.
No, neither do I. Yeah. Awesome. Unless you have anything else?
I have nothing
No,
at 10 after
okay.
10.
No, I make.
So we just have
Yeah.
one,
Minutes.
we have one
Approve
minute.
the minutes of March 25, 2025 as submitted.
Second,
Second,
all those in favor?
I,
Oh,
Do
no,
roll
it has to
call.
be roll
Yeah.
call.
Rob,
Yes.
Mark,
yes.
Abby.
Aye.
Linda,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Andrew, yes. And that is it. Thank you all for attending.